Welcome back to the wild and wacky world of Return of Mount Hua Sect. Today, we're diving into chapters 101 to 110, where the stakes are higher than your uncle's cholesterol levels after Thanksgiving dinner. But hold on to your swords. Today, instead of blood, we're spicing things up with some good old tomato ketchup. That's right, folks. We're keeping it saucy while staying within community guidelines. So get ready for epic battles that turn into condiment fights. And remember, it's not just the warriors who are fierce, the ketchup is too. Let's dive into the chaos, hilarity, and a whole lot of ketchup coated madness. Episode 101. I will make sure you never forget this day. 1. How dare he speak like that? The reaction was intense. Jin Jumryong clenched his teeth. While he was still reeling from the shocking defeat, Yoon Jong took the initiative to demand the next battle. Such a cheeky request made Jin Gumryong's blood boil, though it felt more like tomato ketchup was coursing through his veins at this point. On the other hand, Yoon Jong recoiled at the fiery reaction from the Southern Edge's side. Did I overdo it? Sure, they were there to fight, but the way they reacted was like someone had just dumped a gallon of ketchup on their heads. Yet, Yoonjong had to keep the momentum alive, started by none other than Chung Myung. Gongjin! Gongjin! Jin Jumryong shouted, looking like a tomato about to burst. Yes, Sasuk! Go! Smash that cocky bastard and hurry back, and for the love of all things holy, don't come back covered in ketchup! Yes, Jin Jumryong's face twisted in frustration. He was a perfectionist. He wanted a complete victory over Mount Hua, but now that perfect flow had been smashed like a tomato underfoot. Chung Myung! His eyes turned to Chung Myung, who was probably munching on a snack somewhere. This idiot! Jin Gumryong didn't expect Son Wooryong to suffer such a devastating defeat. Was their disciple weaker than expected? Or was Chung Myung that much stronger than anticipated? Definitely the latter. It was impossible for Jin Gumryong to misinterpret Son Wooryang's capabilities. He was undoubtedly the strongest among the third-class disciples. For him to be defeated by Chung Myung meant that Chung Myung was not just a little stronger. He was packing some serious catch-up power. Okay, it's a blow, but it's not the end. If the remaining disciples can rally and claim victory, this conference will end with Chung Myung being the only remarkable thing about Mount Hua, and maybe some catch-up on the side. Gongjin, one of the strongest of the third-class disciples, took to the stage with a wooden sword in hand. With that, Yoon Jong took a deep breath. Is he my opponent again? This was actually sooner than Yoon Jong expected. He had battled Gongjin in the last conference too. Back then, he was pushed back and crushed like an overripe tomato without even getting a chance to counterattack. Now, 2 years later, honestly, I had no chance of winning. If it hadn't been for Chung Myung's arrival, Yoon Jong might as well have been wearing a ketchup costume and waiting to get squashed. Before Chung Myung joined the sect, Yoon Jong trained like a potato. Absolutely no motivation. Because, let's face it, training without the desire to improve is like trying to catch up with a train. But then, one day, Chung Myung appeared like a magical condiment that made everything taste better. Thanks to him, Yoon Jong spent the past few months doing his best, not just slacking around. Could the gap have narrowed with just a couple months of training? Yoon Jong wasn't sure, but I won't lose so easily. He was the great Sahyung of the third-class disciples. Even if Chung Myung was truly the one in charge, Yoon Jong still had his pride. He refused to give an unseemly performance here, like slipping on ketchup right before the big finish. Gongjin fiercely glared at Yoon Jong, his eyes narrowing. No need for words. I'll make you painfully aware of how deeply I care about victory. Like really, I care a lot. No ketchup left behind. I have no intention of saying anything either. Words are useless. Gongjin yelled and rushed at Yoon Jong, who stood there gripping his sword like it was a hot dog. His sword is swift and straight. A sword that could be seen clearly. A traditional sword that followed a predictable path, much like a train on a track. Yet, Yoon Jong couldn't stop it. That was the vast difference between him and Gongjin. A difference so huge, it was like comparing a single French fry to a full basket of fries. But this time, Kang! Gongjin's outstretched sword was blocked by Yoon Jong's blade. Huh? Quickly responding to the unexpected collision, Gong Jin retracted his sword and stabbed again like a chef going for the final cut. It looks like you haven't been just playing around, but you still don't have a chance. Quack! Yunjong defended against Gong Jin's relentless assault, feeling like he was stuck in a ketchup bottle, squeezed tight and barely able to escape. It was fast and heavy. Gong Jin's sword was faster and more intense than last time. Yunjong realized just how much Gong Jin had struggled to improve. It felt like he was battling a ketchup fountain, each swing nearly drowning him. But why? Kang! Kang! Yunjong's sword moved concisely to block the incoming attacks, his face a mix of determination and confusion. 2 years ago, he couldn't even see Gong Jin's sword coming. But now, it was like a cartoon where everything was exaggerated, moving in slow motion. Why can I see it so clearly? It wasn't slow. The strikes were fast, fast enough to slice the air and make a loud whoosh. Yet, Yunjong's eyes could perfectly discern the sword's path. It was a complete mystery. Kang! Yunjong's sword traveled efficiently to deflect Gong Jin's strikes. Meanwhile, Gong Jin struggled to regain his footing as he was pushed back. You! Yunjong looked at him, puzzled. Is this all you have? You? No. Don't get angry. I'm just checking in. You aren't trying to disgrace me by using half your strength, right? Because that'd be just rude. You bastard! I'll ketchup you! Gong Jin was boiling red with fury. Yunjong's innocent questions seemed like mockery, making him feel like he was losing a food fight. Seeing Gong Jin's reaction, Yunjong became more flustered rather than afraid. Chengmyung, what the hell did that bastard do to us? Every movement of his rushing opponent could be seen and felt. Yunjong could tell from the simple movements of Gong Jin's shoulders which direction the strikes would come from. It was not predicting the sword's path. He could see it with his eyes and understand. Swish! Though Gong Jin swung his wooden sword violently, Yunjong perfectly avoided it by taking a simple step back. The blade struck empty air like a swing and a miss in baseball. Gong Jin's posture tilted as he put too much power into his swing. A small gap opened up in front of Yunjong, and he saw it like a wide-open door to a fridge full of snacks. Puak! Yunjong's feet moved before his brain could catch up, kicking Gong Jin in the side. When Gong Jin stumbled back, Yunjong looked on in disbelief. Chengmyung! Chengmyung was observing from a distance, looking like he was about to fall asleep, as if he had already foreseen the results of this conference. Ah! Gong Jin lost all reason, drowning in his fury. He charged at Yunjong again. Yunjong spread his legs slightly, raising his sword like a triumphant chef about to serve a feast. From the top. The basic posture of swordsmanship. It was the same stance Yunjong had drilled into his body for 10 whole days. He was practically a machine now. Gong Jin's sword stretched out and his movements began to change. If it was the old Yunjong, he would have panicked and embarrassed himself. But now, Yunjong's eyes could clearly see and understand everything, like watching a cooking show with a perfect recipe. Swoosh! He saw it. The moment when the sword and body connected. Yunjong didn't miss that slight gap, and his body began to move automatically, like a well-oiled machine. Quack! The sword cut through the air without hesitation. An unshaken heart, a disciplined body, and a clear purpose. This sword connected these three cornerstones and pierced through Gong Jin's sword path before striking him on the shoulder like a perfect dip into a ketchup jar. Frightened, Gong Jin suddenly turned his sword to block. Quang! And the sword soared into the sky, spinning like a crazy pizza toss. Thud! The soft sound of the sword hitting the ground rang quietly through the training hall, which was stunned into silence. Everyone was left in utter disbelief. Did he just throw his sword? Gong Jin stood frozen, staring at Yunjong with wide eyes, as if he had just witnessed a cat riding a unicycle. Did you just forget your sword? Or were you planning to duel me with some fancy moves from the ketchup aisle? Everyone held their breath, waiting for Gong Jin's reaction. The tension was palpable, like waiting for the punchline in a bad joke. You bastard! Gong Jin finally shouted, his cheeks turning as red as a ripe tomato. I didn't forget it. I just wanted to show off my fancy moves. Fancy moves, huh? Because that looked more like an impromptu dance routine than a sword fight. The laughter that erupted was like a ketchup bottle being squeezed too hard, spraying out everywhere. Okay, let's be serious, Gong Jin exclaimed, recovering his composure. or at least trying to. He picked up his sword, a little wobbly, and glared at Yunjong. This time, I won't hold back. Right, because the last attempt was such a stunning success, Yunjong teased, grinning. With renewed determination, Gongjin charged again, swinging his sword like he was trying to chop vegetables for a salad. This time, Yunjong stood firm, his stance ready to absorb whatever was thrown his way. Bring it on, salad chef, he yelled, his confidence bubbling up like soda in a shaken can. Clang! Their swords clashed once more, and the sound echoed through the hall. Yunjong dodged to the side, avoiding Gongjin's wild swings with the grace of someone trying to dodge ketchup stains at a barbecue. Not bad. Not bad, Yunjong shouted, keeping his rhythm. But you might want to practice your aim. It's like you're trying to hit a piñata blindfolded. Shut up, Gongjin yelled, lunging forward again, his focus intense, as if he was trying to capture the last hot dog at a summer picnic. Yunjong was ready, but suddenly, Gongjin tripped over his own feet, and in a spectacularly awkward moment, he swung wildly, missing completely, and instead doing an accidental pirouette. Thud. Gongjin ended up sprawled on the ground, his face now a deep shade of red. Whether from embarrassment or the heat of the moment, no one could tell. Wow, that's some impressive footwork there. Yunjong quipped, trying to contain his laughter. Maybe you should consider a career in dance instead. The crowd erupted, and even Jin Jemryong was cracking a smile, his earlier frustration melting away. With a grunt, Gongjin pushed himself up, his pride slightly bruised but still fiery. Just you wait. I'm going to wipe that grin off your face. Yeah, with what? Another dance routine? Yunjong shot back, playfully taunting him. Just watch, Gongjin shouted, channeling all his embarrassment into determination. He charged again, but this time, he was more focused. Clang! Yunjong met him with a solid block, their swords locking for a moment, and the strain between them was palpable. But then, a smirk grew on Yunjong's face. You know what would really help you right now? Some ketchup for that burn. Shut up, Gongjin retorted, trying to push back harder, but Yunjong maintained his stance, like a steadfast kitchen counter against a rogue chef. Then, with a quick twist, Yunjong managed to break free from the lock and took a step back. Okay, time to end this. With a powerful thrust, Yunjong lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air. Gongjin's eyes widened in shock, the fear of losing turning his tomato-red face pale. Clang! Just in time, Gongjin brought his sword up to block, but he was pushed back again, stumbling once more as he lost his footing. Oops, guess you need to work on your balance. Or maybe eat a snack before you fight? Yunjong couldn't help but tease, trying to keep the mood light. With renewed strength, Gongjin got back up, visibly more determined. Okay, no more messing around. I'll show you my true power. And with that, he charged once more, his spirit unyielded, ready to fight for his pride, despite the embarrassment of the past moments. The two locked swords again, their eyes fierce and focused, and for a brief moment, time stood still. Let's go! Yunjong knew this was the moment to strike, the crescendo in their battle where victory was within reach. Prepare to taste defeat, he declared dramatically, almost as if he were announcing a new flavor of ketchup. Gongjin replied with a fierce shout, I'm going to crush you like a tomato underfoot. And as they clashed again, the training hall echoed with the sound of swords and laughter, each blow laced with both competitiveness and camaraderie, a testament to their growth and determination. I will make sure you never forget this day. 2. Look there. Huh? Chung Myung pointed to the central area and spoke. While Jo Gul was taking his place, the disciples of the Southern Edge sect came and retrieved the fallen Gongjin. What do you think of the Southern Edge sect? What do you mean? Are they strong? Weak? Obviously, they're strong. Chung Myung stared wide-eyed at Yunjong and asked, Then Sahyung defeated such a strong foe? Don't say that. It just happened. What do I know? Chung Myung shook his head and giggled. Strong? Right? Strong. He's strong for his age, but he's weak too. What does that mean? Because he learned so much more than what he should have been taught at that age. Isn't it good to learn a lot and get used to it? Sahyung? Chung Myung reached out and drew the shape of a tower. Martial arts are like a tower. How tall you can build a tower depends on how strong the bottom floor and the foundation are. Right? But those people started building the second floor before the first was finished. Then they added a third on top of the incomplete second as well. They're stacking that weight like it's a game of Jenga, and we all know what happens next. What do you think will happen if those kids collide with someone who perfectly developed their tower's ground floor? They'll collapse. That's right, Chung Myung said. All I did was clear away the wood on the first floor. Sahyungs were building and reforged the foundation. It's difficult to build, but it won't crumble easily once built. I don't understand. Did that training have such meaning? What are the basics of martial arts? Chung Myung's face grew serious. There is one fundamental basic: to use the body to strike down the opponent perfectly. The stem forms from that one root, and then the branches proliferate. I just had Sahyung's focus on developing the roots. See. Chung Myung pointed to Joe Gul. Joe Gul was facing off against the Southern Edge disciple that just came out. An unshakable lower body, clean swordsmanship, and the eyesight to carefully observe everything happening. And above all, Joe Gul's sword pushes the opponent's sword and delivers a blow. Concentration capable of bringing out all of the body's power at once. Pwak! Chung Myung smiled. The disciple of the Southern Edge sect collapsed, and Joe Gul looked at his opponent with a puzzled expression. He turned his head, unable to believe what he had done. Did I really just do that? Or did I accidentally knock him out with my good looks? For now, that is all you need. With that one alone, you can defeat all the kids your age. Of course, that isn't all. They also took the pill that Chung Myung gave them. By following through with Chung Myung's training regime, the disciples managed to create bodies that were second to none. Talk about gains. They're practically walking protein shakes now. If they didn't lag behind in physical strength and internal chi, their battles were bound to be decided by their swordsmanship. And anyone who faced them without a solid foundation was destined to fall before them. Joe Gul returned and looked at Chung Myung with blank eyes. Following his lead, another disciple from Mount Hua went forward. Totally confident, he was full of desire to fight and bring honor to their sect. I still don't understand. If it's that easy, then why don't the other sects train like that? Easy? Chung Myung shook his head. Was the training until now easy? And no, I didn't mean that, but conceptually, Sahyung. Yes, Sahyung must have studied, right? To be in good form, take rest, take care of one's parents sincerely, and not deceive the weak or be greedy for riches. Above all, be polite to others, respect those below you, live life without losing yourself, keep your friends close, and be loyal to the nation. Can you do all of that? No. Why? Isn't that how you become a true man? That. Yoonjong stayed silent. He knew what Chung Myung was talking about. Everyone knows what it means to be an exceptional man. However, only 2 or 3 people in the nation can follow every tenet throughout their entire lives. Such a small number within this vast nation. In other words, despite knowing what it takes, ordinary people cannot do it. Constant water dripping down can pierce a rock. Always devote yourself and work hard. Nothing is more important than effort. The ancestors endlessly emphasize hard work and dedication. Do you know the reason? Well, because people can't do that. Chung Myung had a bitter smile. In fact, Chung Myung was the same in the past. He always craved stronger swordsmanship and fame, even though his Sahyung constantly nagged him about concentrating on his basics. Even in Chung Myung's final moments, he sought higher ground and never looked down. Only after death did he realize, train to the point of death, push past your limits, and devote yourself to it again and again. It might sound like nonsense. Chung Myung pointed to the central area. Gasp! Mount Hua's disciple was causing the Southern Edge sect's disciple to falter and retreat. It was an impressive sight. Mount Hua's disciple wasn't giving his foe any chance to attack or recover. It was like watching a cat play with a mouse, if the mouse was really bad at dodgeball. But that's what happens. Although we know what it takes, people can't push themselves that hard. Who would choose to do so? After 3 days, they'd lie down and say they can't do it, run away, or make some excuse. Yoonjong nodded. Didn't they also try to escape? It was Chung Myung who grabbed them by the collar and forced them to continue. You, Sahyungs, did it, Chung Myung said firmly. After you endured that, the match was already won. There is nothing more to see. Those who only look up without seeing what's beneath their feet will lose their footing and collapse. If a bird without wings believes that it can fly, it'll only realize the truth after the jump. Chung Myung clicked his tongue when he saw the disciple of the Southern Edge sect being carried away. Their feet betrayed them, and now they'll fall. Yunjong's eyes trembled. He thought that the training was being overdone. It wasn't just once or twice that he wanted to curse Chung Myung for his vicious methods, but he endured. He persevered until the end, hoping that he would grow stronger in some way, but all that training was done with a far-off future in mind? Where the hell did this guy learn all this? Yunjong couldn't understand Chung Myung at all, but he was certain of one thing. Pak! Another Southern Edge disciple fell to the ground. Yunjong knew. His sages weren't too different. At least, aside from Yunjong and Jogol, the 10 disciples representing Mount Hua were all roughly equal in their abilities. There was such a large difference between the previous disciple and his opponent, so the result of the next battle would be the same. That meant, we're going to win? Mount Hua's third-class disciples against the Southern Edge sect? Yunjong could feel it. They were really winning against those bastards. We are winning? No one responded to Yunjong's words. They couldn't deny what was happening before them, but it wasn't easy to believe either. It was because they never thought this could happen. But there was no need for them to believe it. No matter what Yunjong or anyone else thought, the result of the conference was real. One person. And another. Ach! A shrill scream signaled the end. In an instant, 10 disciples fell. Ach! We won. All 10. We won them all. Damn it! Chung Myung! We did it! We did it! The third-class disciples clenched their fists and cheered. Some even wept. Even the second-class disciples were running to embrace them. It was like a festival. 10 wins in a row. All of Mount Hua's third-class disciples were victorious. 10 consecutive victories followed after 10 straight losses. It was evident which side would have better momentum and which side had a greater sense of victory. The disciples from Mount Hua defeated the third-class disciples of the Southern Edge sect. Chung Myung! Yunjong grabbed his hand with a thrilled expression. We won! We won! Thank you! Thanks to you! Right when Yunjong was about to speak words of admiration that he'd kept hidden in his heart, Chung Myung spoke. Win? An icy air instantly froze the heated atmosphere as Chung Myung's words escaped. Everyone's eyes focused on Chung Myung, who tilted his head to the side. What's wrong with him now? Here we go again. This time my heart will stop. Seeing their anxious gazes, he said, like this? Again, what more now? As Chung Myung approached the center of the arena, the atmosphere shifted palpably. His previous demeanor of lighthearted teasing had vanished, replaced by an intensity that commanded attention. He felt the adrenaline coursing through him, each step toward the Southern Edge disciples a step toward vengeance. Chung Myung! Yunjong shouted, desperate to rein him in. What are you planning? Chung Myung didn't reply. Instead, he locked eyes with the remaining Southern Edge disciples, their expressions wavering between defiance and uncertainty. The cheers from the Mount Hua disciples faded, replaced by a heavy silence, as if the entire world held its breath. I hope you enjoyed your little game, Chung Myung declared, his voice booming. But this is where the real fun begins. You think 10 losses were bad? How about we make it 20? The Southern Edge disciples exchanged nervous glances. Their earlier bravado was melting away like snow under the spring sun. They hadn't expected such fierce resistance from Mount Hua, especially not from its so-called third-class disciples. Chung Myung continued, Do you remember how you laughed at us? Do you remember the insults you threw? Today, I will ensure you understand exactly why that was a mistake. With each word, Chung Myung's aura expanded, wrapping around him like a tempest ready to unleash its fury. He knew that the previous 10 victories were just the tip of the iceberg. He had his sights set higher, much higher. Come on, who's next? He shouted, the challenge echoing through the arena. I can promise you this. You'll be leaving here with memories you won't forget anytime soon. One of the Southern Edge disciples, a tall figure with a sneer that barely masked his trepidation, stepped forward. You think you can intimidate us? We're not afraid of you. Oh, really? Chung Myung smirked, confidence radiating from him. Let's put that to the test. With a flick of his wrist, Chung Myung drew his sword, its blade glinting ominously under the sunlight. The air around him crackled with anticipation, and the crowd felt the tension escalate as if they were witnessing the calm before a storm. The disciple hesitated, but pride won over fear. "I'll show you what real strength looks like," he shouted, lunging forward with his sword drawn. Chung Myung sidestepped effortlessly, his movements fluid and graceful. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, his voice a playful mockery. "I expected more from a disciple of the Southern Edge sect." As the Southern Edge disciple swung his sword, Chung Myung countered with precise strikes, each blow infused with the power of his training. He could feel the energy surging through him, a whirlwind of momentum that fueled his every move. The crowd gasped as he deflected the disciple's attacks with ease, their disbelief growing as he started to toy with his opponent. "You see," Chung Myung explained, "it's not about the flashy moves or the number of techniques you know. It's about mastering the basics and having the guts to use them. Something you seem to have forgotten." With a final flourish, Chung Myung disarmed his opponent, sending the sword flying from the disciple's grasp. The crowd erupted into cheers, the Mount Hua disciples roaring with pride at their champion's prowess. "Next," Chung Myung called, his voice carrying over the tumult. He felt the surge of exhilaration with every victory, a fire igniting within him that wouldn't be quenched until he had utterly defeated the Southern Edge sect. One by one, the Southern Edge disciples fell before him. Each battle a testament to Chung Myung's relentless training and unwavering determination. With each victory, his confidence soared, and he could see the tides of the match turning in their favor. Amidst the excitement, Yoonjong watched in awe, his heart racing. He had known Chung Myung was formidable, but seeing him in action was an entirely different experience. It was as if he had unlocked a hidden power, a truth that lay dormant, waiting to be awakened. Then, the final Southern Edge disciple stood before Chung Myung, the last line of defense. Fear danced in his eyes as he gripped his sword tightly, glancing back at his fallen comrades. "Just give up," he pleaded. "You've already won." "Won?" Chung Myung laughed, the sound ringing with a mix of amusement and menace. "Oh no, my friend, I'm just getting started." In an instant, he lunged forward, a blur of movement that left the disciple disoriented. With a swift, calculated strike, he sent the opponent sprawling to the ground. Victory isn't about the numbers, it's about the heart. Chung Myung shouted as the crowd erupted into frenetic cheers once again. When the dust settled, Chung Myung stood tall, his chest heaving with exertion and triumph. He turned to face the Mount Hua disciples, his expression one of fierce determination. "This isn't just a victory for us, it's a statement. Never again will they underestimate Mount Hua." Yoonjong and the others surged forward, engulfing Chung Myung in a euphoric embrace. They were no longer just disciples, they were warriors, champions of their sect, and they had fought tooth and nail for every victory. But amidst the celebration, a shadow loomed over Chung Myung's thoughts. While this was a moment of glory, he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The Southern Edge sect might have lost today, but they wouldn't forget this defeat easily. He would need to prepare, to fortify Mount Hua against whatever retaliation might come next. The winds of change were blowing, and Chung Myung was ready to face them head-on. "Let's go," he shouted, shaking off the lingering doubts. "We've got more to do, and this fight is far from over." With renewed vigor, the disciples rallied around their leader, the spirit of Mount Hua burning brighter than ever. They were ready to take on the world, one battle at a time. Episode 103, I'll make sure you never forget this day. 3. Quack, quack. Sect leader, get your life together. Where the hell are the doctors? Are they on a lunch break or something? Doctors, move out of the way. Hunsang shoved Hunyang aside like he was swatting a fly, placing his hand on Hunjong's back. He started channeling his chi, hoping it would fix the mess. But then, Hunsang paused for a second, completely confused. Is his Dantian shaking in happiness? He had never heard of such a ridiculous thing. But here it was, happening right before his eyes, like he'd just witnessed a unicorn doing a tap dance. Hyunjong took in some deep breaths, soaking up Hunsang's energy like it was his morning coffee. I've calmed down. Are you all right, sect leader? Hyunsang asked, although his face screamed, I'm not sure what the hell just happened. Am I fine? Hyunjong stared at him like someone who'd just seen their favorite TV show character die and come back to life in the same episode. You're asking if I'm all right now? I may have misread the room, Sayong. Hyunsang winced. Hyunjong wasn't even listening. The man was too busy gulping down deep breaths like they were on sale. Can you blame him? His hands were shaking like he was coming off a week-long caffeine binge. Unjeom. Yes, sect leader. Did you teach the kids that? Unjeom smiled like he'd just won the lottery. I wish I could take credit, but nah. They did it all themselves, like some DIY warrior project. By themselves? Hyunjong asked like a parent whose kid just fixed the Wi-Fi without any help. Am, who had been silently fanboying over the whole thing, piped in. Yeah, maybe Chung Myung had something to do with it. Chung Myung? Hyunjong wasn't even shocked at this point. Anytime something outrageous happened, that kid's name always popped up. It was like he had a monopoly on chaos. That little devil, what the hell is he doing when we're not looking? Didn't you let him into the sect, though? Unjeom chuckled. You don't know anything about him? How would I know? He showed up, and I had a gut feeling, so I said yes. You think I was doing background checks? That gut feeling was now paying off big time. It was like finding out the stray cat you adopted could do your taxes. Ever since Mount Hua had been wrecked by the demonic sect, the place couldn't beat the Southern Edge sect to save its life. But now, the third-class disciples had done what everyone thought was impossible. Hyunjong's eyes were practically dripping tears of joy. Oh, ancestors, I can finally rest in peace. Wait a second. Chung Myung had returned to the arena. I think he's looking this way, someone whispered. What in the world is he planning now? Now the air was filled with anticipation. Hyunjong clenched his fists like he was about to see the season finale of his favorite drama. Chung Myung's smile, though? It was the kind of grin that would make a villain proud. Is that kid still on the Taoist path? Hyunjong wondered. Because that smile is making me doubt everything. Meanwhile, across the arena, Samasong was about to lose his mind. The dude was so mad he bit his lip until it bled. Probably not the brightest move, but hey, he was in the heat of the moment. 10 consecutive losses. 10. Straight losses. It was like getting your car totaled after finally winning the lottery. There was no recovering from this. Didn't you all say you'd come back victorious? What is this? Losing to Mount Hua? You worthless bastards! Samasong shouted, his voice trembling with rage. Jin Gumryong stood there, glaring daggers at the Mount Hua disciples, wondering how the hell this happened. His big dream of a clean sweep had turned into a disaster, and now they were stuck in a humiliating draw. Damn it, Jin Gumryong cursed under his breath. Even in front of his elders, he couldn't hold back, his gaze locked onto Chung Myung. That brat! Everyone's eyes followed his. Oh, no way! He's going back out there. What's this little troublemaker got planned now? The audience buzzed like bees at a summer picnic. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. The third-class disciples of Mount Hua had just wrecked Southern Edge's reputation, and now even their behavior was being praised. Mount Hua's disciples seemed to be gracious winners, unlike some people, an onlooker sneered. Meanwhile, Elder Huang looked like he was ready to pop a bottle of champagne. Mount Hua's stock was rising like crazy, and the Southern Edge sect was sinking fast. Investors were already calculating how much cash they should start throwing Mount Hua's way. Elder Huang had hit the jackpot. Now then, he was about to wrap things up, but suddenly a voice cut through the noise. Wait! Huang turned to see who had spoken. Chung Myung stood in the center, that mischievous grin still plastered on his face. Isn't he that boy from earlier? Someone muttered. Huang squinted. Yeah, that's him. What do you want, young disciple? Chung Myung's smile widened. I have a question for everyone here. It's pretty simple. Since you all saw what happened, you should be able to answer this. What is it? Huang asked. Who won? Huh? Everyone went silent. Who won? Wasn't it a draw? Wang Munyak's expression stiffened. This kid doesn't want to end things with a draw, he realized. I mean, if we don't settle this properly, wouldn't everyone leave feeling kinda, I don't know, disappointed? And I'm sure Southern Edge would feel real down about it too. What do you suggest? Simple. Chung Myung pointed at the Southern Edge disciples, his grin growing even wider. The 10 who won over there, against the 10 who won from Mount Hua. Why us? Yoonjung stammered, feeling the weight of Chung Myung's gaze. Chung Myung looked around dramatically before dropping the real bomb. Instead of boring one-on-one matches, let's make this more exciting. A survival match. Whoever wins stays in the fight until they lose. The last person standing is the real winner. What do you think? Then he delivered the killing blow. Of course, I'd understand if they're too scared. And just like that, the gauntlet was thrown. At Chung Myung's suggestion, the entire Southern Edge sect camp looked like someone had just slapped them with a fish. Their faces ranged from disbelief to rage, but mostly embarrassment. What did he just say? Jin Jumryong's voice was as cold as ice, but you could see the flames of fury dancing in his eyes. This punk. Samasung was practically frothing at the mouth. Scared? Scared? You dare accuse us of being scared? Chung Myung didn't even flinch, still smiling like a fox who just found an unlocked chicken coop. Hey, no need to get all worked up. If you're confident, let's settle this like men. Or, like sex with some self-respect. Chung Myung, Yoonjong tried to intervene, whispering frantically. Are you insane? A fight like that? We could lose everything. Chung Myung turned to his fellow disciples, looking them dead in the eyes with a smirk that had chaos written all over it. Lose? Have I ever let you guys down before? Yoonjong sighed. Well, no, but exactly. Chung Myung winked. Besides, these Southern Edge fools have been cruising for a bruising since they strutted in here. Now's our chance to knock them off their high horse again. The Southern Edge sect members weren't backing down either. The second-class disciples were riled up now. They had taken their embarrassing loss to the third-class disciples hard, but this was a chance for redemption. Jin Go-mryong was the first to step forward, sneering at Chung Myung. Fine. You want a survival match? You've got one. But don't cry when we crush you. Chung Myung stretched his arms behind his head casually, clearly not fazed. Oh, don't worry. I'm more of a laugh-in-your-face kind of guy. Elder Wang, who had been watching from the sidelines, raised an eyebrow. He wasn't exactly sure if this was going to turn out in favor of Mount Hua, but then again, every time he doubted Chung Myung, the kid had delivered. Very well, Hwang Munyak said, addressing both sects. It seems the decision has been made. A survival match it is. May the best sect win. Jin Jumryong's fists clenched as he glared at the Mount Hua disciples. You better be ready. Chung Myung cracked his knuckles, totally nonchalant. I was born ready. The battle begins. The air was tense as the two sects prepared for what could only be described as a battle royale of martial arts. One by one, the winning disciples from each side stood up, facing each other like gladiators in an ancient arena. The crowd, meanwhile, was going wild. Bets were being placed left and right. 10 gold coins on Mount Hua. No way, Southern Edge has this in the bag. Chung Myung's smile never wavered as he watched the Southern Edge sect disciples stepping forward. The first fight was quick. Too quick. One of the Southern Edge's second-class disciples, cocky from his earlier win, stepped up with a swagger that screamed, I'm about to humiliate you. He didn't even last 5 seconds. With one swift move, Mount Hua's third-class disciple had him eating dirt. The crowd gasped, and then cheers erupted from Mount Hua's side. Chung Myung was lounging off to the side, arms crossed, with a satisfied smirk. Yeah, that's what I thought. But the next round? That one didn't go as smoothly. Another Mount Hua disciple stepped up, but this time, Southern Edge struck back with a vengeance. The fight was brutal, back and forth like a deadly game of chess, but in the end, Southern Edge barely managed to scrape out a win. The Southern Edge sect disciples cheered. That's right! Show them who's boss! Chung Myung rolled his eyes. All right, that's enough of that. He got up, dusted himself off, and sauntered toward the center of the arena like he was on his way to buy groceries, not about to engage in a life-or-death battle. The Southern Edge disciple who had just won was standing there, trying to catch his breath, when Chung Myung casually waved at him. Hey, great job. You must be exhausted after that fight. Why don't you take a nap? Before the guy could even process the insult, Chung Myung was already moving. In a blur, he swept the guy off his feet, literally, and sent him flying off the stage. It was over in an instant. The crowd lost it. Southern Edge? Not so much. Samasung looked like he was going to have a stroke. How? How is this brat doing this? One by one, the fights continued. And one by one, Chung Myung and his fellow disciples laid waste to their opponents. It was like watching a well-oiled machine, with Chung Myung at the helm, cutting through Southern Edge like a hot knife through butter. Eventually, it was down to just a few. And of course, it came down to the two big shots, Jin Gum-ryong and Chung Myung. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, the tension so thick you could cut it with a sword. Jin Gum-ryong stepped forward, eyes blazing with fury. "This time, I'm going to end you." Chung Myung yawned, giving him a lazy look. "Man, you talk a lot. Let's just get this over with. I've got dinner plans." Jin Gum-ryong snarled and lunged forward, his sword flashing in the sunlight. But Chung Myung? He was moving like he was born to fight, effortlessly dodging, blocking, and countering every move Jin Gum-ryong threw at him. The battle raged on, sparks flying as their swords clashed. Jin Gum-ryong fought like a man possessed, but no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't break through Chung Myung's defenses. Chung Myung's smile never faded. In the end, it was over in a flash. With a swift, decisive strike, Chung Myung disarmed Jin Gum-ryong and sent him sprawling to the ground. The crowd exploded into cheers. Mount Hua had won. Chung Myung looked down at Jin Gum-ryong, who was panting heavily, completely defeated. "Don't take it too hard. You'll get better. Probably. Maybe." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Southern Edge to lick their wounds. Mount Hua's victory was undeniable. The crowd was buzzing with excitement, and even the most skeptical onlookers were forced to acknowledge the overwhelming skill and grace of Mount Hua's disciples. As the sun began to set, Hyunjong stood proudly, tears in his eyes. "We did it. We really did it." But Chung Myung, as usual, had the last word. Yeah. Can we wrap this up? I'm starving." Episode 104. I will make sure you never forget this day. Jin Gum-ryong stared at Chung Myung, absolutely dumbfounded. What in the fresh hell is this kid up to now? Another fight? Between the third and second class disciples? Based on winning streaks? Was this kid trying to pull a fast one? Jin Gum-ryong ground his teeth together. He could almost hear them creaking. There's only so much bullshot the Southern Edge sect can take. As the head of the second-class disciples, there was no way Jin Gum-ryong was going to let this slide. Sure, the third-class brats from Mount Hua managed to whoop their opponents, but that was still a fight between the same class of disciples. You can't just throw that out the window and pretend like it's even close to the same level. Talent and effort can't bridge every gap, and the difference between classes was a big one. If that kind of thing could be overcome so easily, every hierarchy in the martial world would just collapse, and nobody would care about rank. Jin Gum-ryong had never heard of some younger generation running up to smack down their seniors. Just being asked was an insult. A loud one. Like someone yelling, "You ain't shot," right in his face. That little bastard. As Jin Gum-ryong was about to lose his cool and throw a fit, Sama-sung grabbed his shoulder. "Elder?" Jin Gum-ryong barked. "Calm down," Sama-sung grumbled. "But our name's already been dragged through the mud. If we back out now, they'll say we tucked tail and ran like scared little butches." Jin Gum-ryong bit his lip. Damn it, the elder was right. If they ran now, Mount Hua's folks wouldn't let them forget it for the next century. If the challenge had come politely, there'd be some way to back out gracefully. But there was no escape when the brat just walked up and smacked them in the face with a challenge. It was humiliating if they accepted. Even more humiliating if they didn't. Sama-sung lifted his head and looked over at Chung Myung. "Chung Myung, was it?" "Yes. Looks like you finally remembered." Chung Myung smiled, that irritating smug smile of his. "I heard your suggestion, but I don't think you're in a position to make offers on behalf of Mount Hua, are you?" Sama-sung snapped. "Then why don't you go ask the sect leader yourself? I'm sure he'll be thrilled." This brat. Sama-sung's eye twitched. How can a person be this annoying? He hadn't even raised a sword, and already Sama-sung felt like his blood pressure was spiking. "I'm talking about your attitude. Is this how Mount Hua teaches its disciples?" Sama-sung tried going for the old age and manners card. Always a classic. Put someone in a bad mood, and then drag in respect and courtesy. It's worked for centuries. "I wouldn't know," Chung Myung shrugged. "I'm an orphan, so I never had anyone teach me manners. I've been winging it this whole time." "Parents? Where the hell did that come from?" Sama-sung felt trapped in a corner. What are you even supposed to say to that? Huang Munyak cleared his throat and chimed in, trying to ease the tension a bit. Let's see what the crowd thinks. The crowd wasn't about to let this kind of action slide by unnoticed. Hell yeah! I'd love to see this fight. I want to see those third-class kids go up against the second class. Let's see how far they can push it. Wang Munyak nodded at the responses. Of course, the crowd wanted more action. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. You can't look away. Chung Myung smiled. So, the people want it. Sect leader, how about you? Hyunjong, the sect leader, looked puzzled. What is he doing now? He leaned over and asked Eunjeom for some advice. Let him do it, sect leader, Eunjeom said. You think I should let this nonsense continue? Eunjeom chuckled. That kid's sharper than you think. He's a cheeky little punk, but he's never acted without a plan. Don't worry. Hyunjong sighed. Sure, but look, Eunjeom continued, we don't have anything to lose here. Mount Hua's already hit rock bottom. Might as well see where this goes. Hyunjong glanced at the other elders, confirming their silent agreement. He nodded. Mount Hua agrees, he shouted. The crowd went wild. Oh man, Southern Edge can't back down now. What a show. This is one for the history books. The air was electric, and even the merchants and onlookers had shifted their tune. Huang Munyak laughed bitterly. Bat-like bastards, he thought, watching them change sides faster than a flip of a coin. Meanwhile, Yoonjong sprinted toward Chung Myung, looking pale as death. What the hell are you doing? Yoonjong hissed, dragging Chung Myung into the corner. What? Chung Myung asked innocently. Bro, are you serious? We can't beat the second-class disciples. You know who they are, right? Jin Jum Ryong. He's the best in Shanxi. Chung Myung chuckled. You should have some self-awareness, man. Huh? I mean, I saved your butt from drowning. And now you're trying to challenge someone with a sword to a fist fight? Nah, we ain't winning this. Yoonjong, who had been feeling a sliver of hope, now looked defeated. So, what's your plan then? Chung Myung grinned wickedly. Oh, there's a plan all right. Wheel warfare. Samasung muttered as he furrowed his brows. It's obvious what they're trying to do. They plan to tire us out by sending in their weaker disciples one after another. If they can score just one victory against us, it'll be enough to brag about for the next 100 years. Jin Gemryong frowned. This little scheme was so transparent it was almost insulting. They want to drain our strength so that by the time we reach the last fight, their final fighter, probably that little brat Chung Myung, can easily finish us off. Samasung's voice was tight with frustration. Jin Jomryong was already clenching his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. I'll just crush them before it comes to that. I'll take them all down. Over 10, 20, hell, I'll take as many as they throw at me. But Samasung shook his head, cutting him off. No, there's no point in walking straight into their trap like a fool. Jin Gemryong blinked in confusion. But what's the point of pride if you're dancing to your enemy's tune? If you fight all of them, they'll just talk about how the mighty Jin Gemryong was toyed with by a bunch of third-class disciples. Jin Gemryong ground his teeth. That sounded worse than losing outright. Damn it. There was no easy way out of this. You will go last, Samasung said firmly. Understood. Jin Gemryong reluctantly nodded. The first? Samasung scanned the disciples standing nearby. His gaze landed on Yubek. You go, Yubek. Yes, Elder. I won't let you down, Yubek responded with confidence. It's okay, even if you can't win every match, Samasung said cautiously. Just tire them out. Surrender before they defeat you if necessary. We don't need to win every fight. We just need to last long enough to wear them down. Understand? Yes, Elder. Yubek saluted with determination. Samasung watched as Yubek stepped up. He had faith in his disciple, but deep down, the thought of playing into this absurd game was infuriating. He clenched his fists and prayed that the Southern Edge sect wouldn't look like fools by the end of the day. Meanwhile, on the other side, Chung Myung was already swaggering his way onto the stage like he was about to put on a comedy show. Wooden sword draped over his shoulder like some lazy punk who just woke up from a nap. Plan? Who needs a plan? He grinned as he stared at Yubek. Let's skip the formalities. Come on, get your ass up here. I'll handle the rest. Yubek looked shocked. The audacity of this guy. He glanced back at Sama Seng, who nodded reluctantly. You want to remember this day forever, Southern Edge sect? Chung Myung smirked. leaning forward and twirling his wooden sword like he was just out for a casual stroll. Good, because I'll make damn sure you never forget it. His voice rang out confidently, calm yet dripping with arrogance. The Southern Edge disciples stared in disbelief at the sight. Is he for real? One of the onlookers whispered. Yup, the kid's either crazy or a genius. Yubek straightened up, his grip tightening on his sword. I don't care if you're Mount Hua's little prodigy. I'm not going to let you make a fool out of the Southern Edge sect. Chung Myung just laughed. Too late for that, buddy. Episode 105. I'll make sure you never forget this day. Everyone's eyes were locked on Chung Myung. The fact that he took the lead? Yeah, nobody saw that coming. I mean, even a newbie who doesn't know a sword from a soup spoon could tell that Chung Myung was on a whole different level compared to the other third-class disciples from Mount Hua. Usually, the strongest guy waits until the end, right? Let everyone else get tired, swoop in, and claim that W. But nope. Our boy Chung Myung decided to YOLO right from the start. What's this dude thinking? Does he really want to go head-to-head with the Southern Edge sect right off the bat? Everyone was expecting some kind of sneaky trick, but nah, Chung Myung was just vibing. Even Hyunjong and Unjeom looked as confused as a cat staring at a cucumber. Sa-hyung, we should stop him, right? I'll take the lead. Yoonjong was having none of it. Bro, you know we can't stop him now. That train has left the station. The third-class disciples just stared at Chung Myung's back with all the anxiety of people watching their drunk friend about to sing karaoke. But Chung Myung? Cool as a cucumber, all focus on the Southern Edge sect. Do these kids today even know the legend of the strongest swordsman? The one who wrecked a gang when he was just 15? Nah, they probably missed that one. And it wasn't even his story, but one he'd heard way too many times. Hell, even Buddha was only 18 when he got woke. But let's be real, Chung Myung didn't care about those stories. He was about to make one today. And trust me, people were going to be talking. Today was about to be legendary. There's two ways to make a name for a sect, he thought. 1, do something so epic no one can ignore you. 2, beat the crap out of someone so everyone knows you're not to be messed with. Being the strongest sect is nice, sure, but having a rising star, someone who makes everyone's jaw drop, that's how you get people to pay attention. And let's face it, nothing makes people more nervous than a disciple who looks like they're just getting started. Mount Hua's third-class disciples beating the Southern Edge's third class? Yeah, that's cute. But what about taking down their second-class disciples? Now that's a story for the ages. And a single third-class disciple wiping out their second-class disciples one by one? Ho ho, that's the kind of shame that sticks with a sect for generations. Chung Myung grinned. Y'all really had to mess with Mount Hua, huh? If you wanted trouble, you should have waited till I wasn't around. Well, I'm about to collect interest on your bad decisions. Chung Myung raised his sword and Yu Baek stepped forward with all the confidence of a guy about to win a bar bet. Your confidence is through the roof, but I'm here to remind you that being cocky without skills is a fast track to getting clowned. Chung Myung didn't even bother with a comeback. He wasn't in the mood for chit-chat. Instead, he turned to the third-class disciples behind him. Sa-hyung, focus on the match, will ya? Just remember what I said. Don't miss a thing. Huh? This wasn't just a fight. It was a show. And Chung Myung wanted Mount Hua's disciples to catch every single move. Chung Myung glanced back at Yu Baek. Mount Hua's third-class disciple, Chung Myung, asks for a match. Yu Baek, looking a little shook, replied, the Southern Edge sect's second-class disciple, Yu Baek, accepts Mount Hua's challenge. Mount Hua's third-class disciples tensed up. Something was different about Chung Myung today. The usual playful provocations? Gone. In their place was a cold, chilling focus, like a swordsman about to walk into battle. Yoonjong felt it too, his eyes glued to Chung Myung as if hypnotized. Something big was about to happen. Chung Myung's sword moved slowly. It was just the opening stance of the equilibrium of Six Sword, but it felt perfect. The form, the speed, everything about it was flawless. Yoonjong couldn't believe it. Don't miss it, he shouted. Watch every single move. Don't blink. No one responded, but they all nodded. No one wanted to miss a second of what was about to go down. I'm gonna fix that cocky head of yours. Baek shouted as he rushed forward, clearly not realizing the danger he was in. Chung Myung's eyes glinted coldly. Equilibrium of 6. Mount Hua's swordsmanship at its purest. Simple. Basic. But the foundation for everything. Baek's sword danced through the air, moving like petals in the wind, graceful but deadly. It was a technique meant to overwhelm. But Chung Myung? He wasn't impressed. He took one step forward, aimed high, and thrust his sword. The flow of Baek's sword vanished like a bad magic trick. How? Chung Myung's sword struck Baek's wrist like a sledgehammer, and he reeled back in pain. Chung Myung didn't waste any time. He stepped forward again and brought his sword down. Bam! The sound echoed through the arena as their swords clashed. Baek barely managed to block, but the weight of Chung Myung's strike pushed him back. Kuak! Baek was getting worked. Chung Myung's sword was relentless. Stab, slash, block, repeat. Each move was simple, but there was no gap in the flow. It was like trying to fight off a flood with a bucket. Baek was desperate. Just once, he needed an opening to use his sect's swordsmanship. If he could just unfold his technique, he could turn the tables. But Chung Myung's sword never gave him that chance. What is this? Baek blocked again, but each time he was pushed further back. His pride kept him standing, but his body was breaking down under the pressure. In the end, Baek's sword was knocked out of his hands, sent flying into the air. Chung Myung's sword came down, stopping just inches from his head. Baek stumbled back, too stunned to comprehend what had just happened. That's it for you, buddy, Chung Myung said softly, turning his gaze to the Southern Edge disciples. They felt a chill run down their spines as he spoke. Next. And that's when the Southern Edge sect realized they had seriously messed up. The Southern Edge sect disciples stood frozen in place. None of them were in a rush to step forward and face the man who just wrecked their boy Baek like a drunk guy at a buffet line, just serving out slices of pain. Chung Myung's face, calm as always, didn't show even a hint of exhaustion. If anything, he looked bored. Who's next? He asked, his tone almost casual, as if he were picking an opponent from a lineup of underwhelming contenders. But inside, these Southern Edge disciples? Oh, they were shaking harder than a gambler with bad luck. Baek was supposed to be one of their heavy hitters, and he just got his wrist turned into jelly. What the hell is this guy made of? The answer? Bad decisions and the determination to turn this match into an all-you-can-beat buffet. The third-class disciples of Mount Hua looked on in awe, but some of them were smiling too. Not that fake smile you get when your boss cracks a bad joke, but a real one, the kind that said, "We got ourselves a beast." Hunjong, watching from the side, felt both amazement and something close to terror. This can't be, he muttered under his breath. What is it, sect leader? Asked Unjeom, his eyes glued to the scene. That swordsmanship? It's too perfect. Even for the equilibrium of 6 sword, it's like watching a master perform a simple task, but with the grace of a deity. How can someone this young? How can he do this? Unjeom's face went pale. Are you saying Chung Myung is as strong as him? They didn't need to say his name. Everyone knew who they were talking about, the great Chung Myung, the one who fought in the past, back when Mount Hua was at its peak. But could it be? Could this young disciple truly be on the same path? Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Chung Myung gave the Southern Edge disciples a look that said, "Y'all better figure it out fast, because I've got places to be." One of the Southern Edge second-class disciples, a guy with a nervous twitch in his eye, finally stepped forward. His name was Ho Jun, and he was about to regret every life choice that led him to this moment. "I'll face you," he said, trying to sound confident, but his voice cracked like he was going through puberty again. Chung Myung just grinned. "Oh, this'll be fun." Without a word, the two faced each other. Ho Jun's hands were sweaty, and his grip on his sword was shaky. He was hoping to avoid what happened to Baek. Maybe, just maybe, he could last a little longer. "I hope you stretched," Chung Myung said with a smirk, "because you're about to get a workout." Ho Jun didn't respond. He knew better than to engage in banter with this maniac. Instead, he rushed forward, his sword gleaming as it caught the sunlight. Chung Myung casually sidestepped the first strike. He didn't even look like he was trying. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent a quick slash toward Ho Jun's leg. Kwa! Ho Jun yelped as he jumped back, barely avoiding the strike. His face turned red with embarrassment. His reputation as one of the Southern Edge sect's second-class disciples was on the line, and he was getting schooled like a first-year rookie. The Mount Hua disciples tried to stifle their laughs, but a few chuckles slipped out. Did he just dodge that by luck? Yunjong whispered to Jogul. I dunno, man, Jogul replied, grinning. But watching him flail around like that is kinda entertaining. Hojun, desperate to save face, lunged forward again, this time aiming for Chung Myung's shoulder. Bad move. Before his sword could even connect, Chung Myung's wooden blade flashed upward, knocking Hojun's weapon out of his hand. Clang! Hojun's sword hit the ground, and he stood there, wide-eyed and frozen. He stared at Chung Myung like he'd just seen a ghost. Chung Myung tilted his head. Did you seriously think that would work? Buddy, you gotta bring something better than that if you want to last more than 5 seconds. Hojun, in complete disbelief, stumbled backward. His mind was racing, but his body had already given up. The Southern Edge sect disciples were watching in horror. One by one, their confidence drained away like a leaky faucet. Chung Myung, still holding his wooden sword, waved it around lazily. Next, he said, his voice dripping with boredom. And that was the moment the Southern Edge disciples realized one thing for sure. Today was not their day. Episode 106, Mount Hua Will Not Disappear, 1. The world seemed to freeze as a chilling silence descended on Mount Hua. No one could open their mouths, and no one thought to move. It was like everyone collectively decided that awkward silence was the best option. Those who knew martial arts couldn't speak because they understood just how incredible the spectacle before their eyes was. Even those who didn't know martial arts recognized that something extraordinary had just gone down, like watching a toddler flawlessly solve a Rubik's Cube. Sama Sung looked at Chung Myung with trembling eyes. With just basic swordsmanship, he overpowered Yu Baek? Without being hit a single time? Those consecutive movements flowed together like water. Yu Baek, who was caught within, couldn't counter. It was like trying to dodge a wave at the beach. Good luck with that. Would it have been possible for me to do the same? Sama Sung couldn't immediately answer the question that popped into his head. Subduing Yu Baek in an instant was something Sama Sung could do. However, only using a basic sword technique to subdue an opponent without giving them a chance to counterattack was different. Even if someone twice as strong as Sama Sung came, it couldn't be guaranteed that he would perform at the level of Chung Myung. It was like trying to get your grandma to do a TikTok dance. It just ain't happening. It was a matter of how perfectly the basics were mastered and performed. To put it crudely, a vast and robust root, not some colorful branches and stems. A firm root that supported everything but stayed invisible. Basically, the foundation you never see but is crucial for holding up the whole house. What the hell did he do? There was a deeper meaning to the fact that the roots were so massive. That the child will grow into a giant tree. He will become a great tree that can cover all of Mount Hua. Imagine the shade that bad boy would provide. At that moment, a cold voice penetrated Sama Sung's mind. Next. Sama Sung's eyes trembled as he looked at Chung Myung. The cold eyes made one sink into the abyss, with his sword pointed to the Southern Edge sect. He must be stopped. This fight was fine. But if Chung Myung grows in the future, everyone will be covered under this child's shadow one day. It's like trying to stand next to the sun and not getting burned. Right. It would be just like when the Plum Blossom Sword Saint roamed about in the past. Elder! Ah! Only then did Sama Sung come to his senses, and after looking at his disciples, he clenched his teeth and thought, who should I send? It was then. Jong So-han growled and glared at Chung Myung. Elder! I will go. I will take him down and teach Mount Hua a lesson. One could only see as much as they knew. Chung Myung's strength was unknown to the Southern Edge sect disciples. Jong So-han didn't understand what he was facing. What should I do? Sama Sung was a bit worried. So-han, yes, Elder. Don't lose easily. Tire him out. What? Do what you are told. Jong So-han looked at the Elder with a puzzled expression and nodded. I will do as the Elder commands. Go. Yes. Jong So-han grabbed his wooden sword and moved. Jin Jum-ryong, who was silent till then, spoke. Elder. It might be difficult to say, but Sama Sung turned his gaze to Jin Jum-ryong. Seeing his face, Jin Gem-ryong flinched and stepped away without realizing it. It was cold. a face that was so cold he could feel his bones chilling. Seriously, it was like staring into the void of a frozen pizza. Samasung turned away his glare. Jang So-han took a deep breath. I'm not being careless. I don't underestimate my opponent, and I'm not overconfident. If he could do his best, the child would lose. If he was careless like you bake, then horrible things could happen, like stepping on a Lego. I commend you for defeating you bake, but I am... The words found themselves trapped within his throat. His mouth was unable to speak and couldn't move. Silence. Chung Myung, who was standing in front of him, seemed to slowly be melding into his surroundings. Jang So-han began to feel an oppressive sinking feeling. This? He didn't realize it while standing in the crowd. However, Chung Myung's aura was something he'd never faced before. Not even Jin Gomryong or their teacher could give him this feeling. He gulped at the thought as his muscles tensed. His instincts were screaming that it was dangerous just by looking at Chung Myung in front of him. Chung Myung's half-hearted eyes calmly observed him. At that moment, without realizing it, Jang So-han took his stance. All the thoughts inside his head disappeared. It felt like only he and Chung Myung existed in this world. At that moment, shh. Chung Myung took a slow step. Although everyone could clearly see that it was a slow step, Chung Myung's body reached Jang So-han instantly. He firmly exerted force on the ground through his legs. The force of the recoil traveled through the waist, and the waist moved to give power to the upper body. As if absorbing that force, the sword swung ferociously. Bang! Nothing fancy. Power, speed, accuracy, just the basics. The sword's power that faithfully adhered to the basics ascended beyond the basics. Jang So-han's legs trembled. As Chung Myung advanced one step ahead, Jang So-han's posture crumpled, and he lost balance as his body twisted with him. Ah, no! And that was it. Jang So-han's eyes saw the wooden sword falling toward his head. Ah! There was fear and shock in his eyes. Unbelievable. Kwang, Jang So-han fell to the floor, blood dripping. This sword, just this sword. The second greatest of Southern Edge's second-class disciples, Jang So-han, was defeated with a single strike to the head. Everyone witnessing this stood aghast in shock. Receiving these shocked gazes, Chung Myung softly spoke. Next, he just silently looked at the Southern Edge sect. Now, the Southern Edge sect seemed to finally understand. Their faces went stiff as if they had seen a ghost. Not yet. It was too early to be surprised. Because Chung Myung still had more to show. He had no intention of being content with just this. Considering what the Southern Edge sect did to Mount Hua, such a defeat was nothing but a light punishment. Today, here, Chung Myung would leave an indelible mark on the Southern Edge sect. As long as Mount Hua survives in this world, and as long as the Southern Edge sect exists, this day will remain a stigma in their sect's history. You did something you shouldn't have done. Mount Hua gave everything to save the world. Despite Chung Myung's dissuasion, his Saiyungs all gave up their lives for the sake of the world. And what was the cost? Shit. The anger that had been suppressed turned into a cold flame that burned in Chung Myung's chest. In the world we protected, the Southern Edge sect was there. Instead of repaying the favor, the Southern Edge sect stole the Plum Blossom sword technique and despised Mount Hua. Now, they were even trying to destroy it. Well, everyone endured it till now. Chung Myung kept control of himself. Several times a day, he felt his broken heart ache. Finally, he didn't need to hold back the anger he'd been suppressing anymore. Next. When Chung Myung sharply shouted, the disciples of the Southern Edge sect shuddered. A few came forward and carried Jang So-han away. One of them remained with a stiff face and stood facing Chung Myung with a sword. I've already shown off the equilibrium of 6, then let's move on to the next technique. Chung Myung retook his stance. A groan that seemed to breathe in sounded from behind him. Falling flower sword! After taking the basic form, Chung Myung raised his sword and aimed it at the foe in front of him, and sprinted ahead. It's different. Jo-gul clenched his fist. Chung Myung's movements changed completely. They weren't serious and concise like what had been previously shown. These were sharp movements, like wind blowing through a canyon. Just by changing the sword technique, his entire bearing changed. How could one man have such perfect execution? The tension in the air was palpable as Chung Myung stood over the fallen disciples of the Southern Edge sect, his sword gleaming ominously under the sunlight. The once boisterous crowd had fallen into a stunned silence, watching in disbelief as their comrades crumpled to the ground, defeated by a mere child. Is this really the so-called genius of Mount Hua? A Southern Edge sect disciple whispered, his voice trembling with fear and disbelief. The bravado that had characterized their sect was crumbling, piece by piece, as the reality of their situation set in. Next, Chung Myung's voice cut through the silence like a knife, ringing with confidence and authority. It was as if he were a seasoned warrior, not yet a young man who had just shown up out of nowhere. With each word, the disciples of the Southern Edge sect felt the weight of the impending doom hanging over them. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't just a duel, it was a massacre. Elder, one of the disciples exclaimed, panic lacing his tone. We can't let this continue. We need to regroup. Sama Sung's face darkened. He had underestimated Chung Myung, thinking that perhaps the boy's bravado could be contained. But witnessing his disciples' quick defeats made it clear. This wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. Stay where you are, Sama Sung commanded, though his voice trembled slightly. We need to evaluate our next move. Evaluate? Are you mad? Jin Jumryong shot back, his eyes wide with disbelief. We can't afford to let him take out more of our disciples. He's a monster. Quiet, Sama Sung hissed, his patience fraying. We need to think strategically. If we rush in blindly, we'll end up like the others. Meanwhile, Chung Myung had taken a moment to catch his breath, his gaze scanning the remaining disciples. He could sense their fear, their hesitation, and it only fueled the fire within him. What's the matter? He taunted, a smirk playing on his lips. Is everyone too scared to come at me? You're all here to teach Mount Hua a lesson, right? A murmur spread through the Southern Edge sect ranks, and they exchanged nervous glances. Finally, a brave soul stepped forward, an older disciple, one who had once faced off against the best in the region. I'll take you down, brat, he shouted, brandishing his sword with a fierce determination that was undercut by the tremor in his hands. You've shown your skill, but I'm no pushover. Chung Myung raised an eyebrow, amused. Really? You think you can beat me just because you're a bit older? Let's see if you can even keep up. With that, he lunged forward, his sword slicing through the air with a fluid grace that seemed almost ethereal. The older disciple swung his sword to intercept, but Chung Myung was already a step ahead. He ducked under the attack and spun, bringing his sword around in a smooth arc that struck true. Thud! The sound echoed across Mount Hua as the disciple crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Chung Myung stepped back, his expression unyielding. Next! The Southern Edge sect was on the verge of collapse, and Chung Myung was just getting started. Yoonjong and Jo Gul exchanged worried glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. Shouldn't we step in? Jo Gul asked, his voice low and shaky. No. Yoonjong shook his head. We have to let him do this. We need to learn, to see what Mount Hua's sword truly is. With every defeated opponent, Chung Myung's reputation grew, not just among the Southern Edge disciples, but also among his own. They had seen him as a loudmouth, a brash kid who often spouted nonsense. But now, he was proving that he was more than just talk. As another Southern Edge disciple stepped forward, Chung Myung felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was in his element, and it felt exhilarating. Bring it on, he shouted, ready to engage. The next opponent hesitated, clearly weighing his options. You think you can just bully us? He challenged, trying to muster some semblance of confidence. Bully? Nah, Chung Myung replied, grinning widely. I'm just here to show you why you messed with Mount Hua. Ready? With that, he charged again, his movements fluid and unrestrained, embodying the essence of Mount Hua's martial arts. He was a force of nature, and every swing of his sword was a reminder of the legacy he carried. The legacy of the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, and the forgotten glory of Mount Hua. As the next disciple fell, Chung Myung felt a surge of pride. This is what we are, he declared, his voice booming over the crowd. Mount Hua will not disappear. Not today. Not ever. The remaining disciples of the Southern Edge sect looked at each other, fear etched on their faces. They had come to challenge Mount Hua, but instead, they were being utterly humiliated. Elder, we must retreat, one of them finally exclaimed, dread creeping into his voice. This isn't a battle anymore. It's a slaughter. Sama Sung gritted his teeth, realizing the tide had turned against them. Retreat? he echoed, his voice tinged with frustration. We can't just run. We have to maintain our dignity. Dignity? The disciple retorted, panic overtaking him. What dignity is left when we're all on the ground? Chung Myung, hearing their frantic discussion, couldn't help but chuckle. You think you can just back off after all this? He taunted. How about I give you one more chance? Anyone brave enough to take me on again? The challenge hung in the air and silence followed. Not a single disciple dared to move. Yeah, that's what I thought. Chung Myung said, satisfied. You're all just a bunch of scaredy cats. Now, who's next? With each defeat, he was not just reclaiming Mount Hua's honor, he was solidifying his place as a formidable force, one that would be remembered long after this day. As he stood tall, sword in hand, the world seemed to freeze around him once again. This was more than a battle. It was a rebirth. Mount Hua will not disappear, Chung Myung vowed quietly to himself, his heart burning with fierce determination. We will rise again, and I will be the one to lead us. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the mountain, Chung Myung's resolve only grew stronger. Today was only the beginning. Episode 107, Mount Hua will not disappear. 2. Thud, another one fell. The blood drained from the faces of the Southern Edge sect's disciples as they stood in shock. 6. 6 had fallen, a total of 6. 6 second-class disciples from the Southern Edge sect had been defeated by a single third-class disciple. It was an utterly one-sided defeat as well. Talk about a wake-up call. But it wasn't just the losses that left them terrified. What truly scared them was the creeping realization that they may not be able to secure even a single victory in this match. Will we be completely annihilated by just one third-class disciple? I mean, come on, it's not like we're fighting a dragon here. Their fingers turned numb, and a cold sweat ran down their spines. Their eyes clouded over in despair, and their legs lost strength. They were about as useful as a chocolate teapot at this point. Was there anyone here that didn't understand how disgraceful this was? This event was 1 in 1,000. If such news leaked, it would travel the world faster than gossip at a family reunion. For Mount Hua, this would be a glorious achievement. And for the Southern Edge sect, this would be a humiliation that would last for generations. Like a tattoo you can't remove, but way worse. That historically absurd disgrace was occurring right here and now on Mount Hua. Realizing that, the Southern Edge sect disciples felt a sense of fear that went beyond this moment's pressure. Next, in their ears echoed the most terrifyingly heartless voice. No one stepped forward. They weren't stupid. If it happened once or twice, it could be considered luck. But winning 6 times in a row was no coincidence. They were staring down the barrel of a complete and utter disaster. It was unbelievable, but Mount Hua's third-class disciple, Chung Myung, was stronger than them. Overwhelmingly. They were no longer afraid of stepping forward and losing. However, the burden of being one of the disciples that contributed to this catastrophic defeat was terrifying beyond measure. It was like being the guy who trips over his own shoelaces in front of a crush. Someone go. I can't. Sahyung. Shouldn't Sahyung go? What am I supposed to do? It was at that moment. Pathetic. Jin Jumryong spoke in a cold voice. The disciples of the Great Southern Edge sect are afraid of a child that's 10 years younger than them? You all seem to have forgotten about shame. Seriously, how did you guys even get here? Everyone was unable to respond and merely bowed their heads like they were being scolded by their mom. Jin Jumrong took a step forward. I will go. Sahyung, I cannot watch that arrogant bastard any longer, so watch me as I regain the sect's honor. Although, I don't know if there's any honor left to reclaim. I mean, we're down to our last breath here. Jin Gemryong's face twisted like a ravenous demon, but someone spoke just as he was about to walk out. Stop. Jin Gemryong turned to see that Sama Sung was looking at him with a stiff face as he called on someone else. Manjoke? Yes, elder. You go? I? Sama Sung cut the disciple's words off as if to preempt and nip any excuses in the bud. He wasn't having any of that nonsense. Go out there and drag him down by the ankles. Do you understand what I mean? Yes. Jin Gumryong tried to disagree, but Sama Sung stopped him. Come here. But the fight is... That's enough. Come here. Sama Sung led Jin Gumryong to the back. After reaching an isolated place where no one could hear them, Sama Sung spoke in a low voice. Do you think the other kids can win? Jinjum Ryong couldn't answer. It was a question with an obvious answer. However, the reason he couldn't respond wasn't that he felt sorry for his juniors. It was because he couldn't understand the reality of what was happening. Nothing was lacking about the second-class disciples' skills, yet they lacked confidence despite their efforts. It was like trying to swim with a boulder strapped to your back. They no longer had any chance against Chung Myung with such a mindset. Samasung spoke bluntly to the confused Jin Gumryong. Your thoughts aren't wrong. Yes? That's a monster. No, I would call him a monster cub, but if you leave him alone, he will become a real monster one day. Elder? And that monster will block the Southern Edge sect's path again. Do you understand what I mean? Jin Gumryong's eyes went wide. Is that possible? Jin Gumryong had to admit that Chung Myung was incredibly strong for his age, but could he really become a hindrance to their sect? Jin Gumryong bit his lip in frustration. Saying that Chung Myung would block the sect's path was the same as saying that Jin Gumryong would be unable to handle him. Whether it's true or not, at least Sama Sung thought so. His blood boiled inside. Does that mean I can barely handle that child? This was an insult he'd never heard before. Jin Jomryong's expression revealed the anger that he couldn't hide. Sama Sung looked deeply into his eyes and spoke. Jomryong, you are a genius. But how many people do you think get called geniuses? It's not something I want to say, but there are at least 10 men of your caliber in your generation alone. Maybe it's even more than that. You're basically a dime a dozen. Jin Jomryong tightly clenched his teeth. Sama Sung coldly asked, do you believe that you can be the strongest in the world in the future? Jin Jomryong may be the most confident person in the world, but even he didn't dare to lightly answer that question. The title of strongest in the world held too much weight. When Jin Jomryong hesitated to answer, Sama Sung narrowed his eyes. Master, genius. This title may be enough to carry on the spirit of the Southern Edge sect and lead our sect into a golden era. However, Sama Sung finally arrived at the main point he really wanted to say. Being the best in the world is impossible. Those who compete for the position of strongest in the world are monsters, not geniuses. Only those who casually ignore common sense, crush down the laws with their power, and defy all reason with their talents can stand on that stage. Right? Sama Sung's head slowly turned towards the center. Monsters like him. Jin Gumryong's shoulders trembled. Elder, I. Jin Gumryong was about to cry out in protest when he was suppressed by the elder's cold voice. But it became difficult to breathe. He may be a monster, but he is still just a cub. Even a dog can bite a tiger to death if it's just a baby. So don't get too cocky, all right? Jin Jomryong understood the meaning behind Sama Seng's words and stared at him in shock. As if to affirm Jin Gumryong's startling thoughts, a quiet and eerie voice penetrated his ears. Kill him. Elder. Sama Sung whispered with a ghastly visage. It's still possible. He is a monster, but he can be dealt with now. You must kill him. If you don't kill him now, we will never get another chance in this lifetime. Don't forget, people with talent don't become the best. Among those called geniuses and prodigies, only one person can truly stand at the peak. Do it now. If you can't kill him, at least cut off his arm. Just something to let him know you mean business. Jin Gumryong unknowingly stepped back. He's lost his mind. It wasn't because of what was said, but a certain sense of madness was glowing in his eyes. Whatever it was, it didn't seem normal. Elder, think rationally. Rational? Sama Sung burst into laughter before grinding his teeth. Are you going to live in his shadow for the rest of your life? Jin Gumryong shut his mouth. Under the shadow? Of that child? Jin Gumryong clenched his fist. His nails digging into the palm of his hand nearly punctured the flesh. It was such a humiliating thought that he couldn't bear it. The choice is yours, Sama Sung said while growling. You don't need to take all the responsibility for this. You just made a mistake. Mistakes are common in spars like this. Don't you think so? Jin Gumryong looked at Sama Sung with fire raging within his eyes and spoke. The atmosphere grew heavy as Chung Myung's piercing gaze locked onto Jin Gumryong, who stood frozen at the edge of the arena. The pressure was suffocating, as if a thick fog of dread had enveloped the remaining Southern Edge sect disciples. Come out, Chung Myung repeated, his voice echoing like a death knell across the arena. Jin Jumryong could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had witnessed the humiliating fall of his comrades, each loss gnawing at his pride. 9 defeats, all by the same person, a third-class disciple. The mere thought made his blood boil with a mix of rage and embarrassment. Now, Chung Myung urged, his tone growing impatient. Jin Gumryong clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His heart raced, pounding like a war drum. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to retaliate, to prove that he was not just another coward cowering in the shadows. He couldn't let the Southern Edge sect be tarnished by the likes of Chung Myung. With a sudden surge of determination, he stepped forward, a fire igniting in his chest. "I'll take you on, you arrogant little brat." The arena buzzed with tension, the eyes of every disciple on him. The Southern Edge sect needed a savior, and Jin Jumryong was ready to be that person. But doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. What if he fell like the others? Chung Myung smirked, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You finally decided to show up. I was starting to think you all preferred hiding behind your failures." Rage coursed through Jin Gumryong, sharpening his focus. "Shut up! You're going to regret underestimating me." With a swift movement, he drew his sword, the steel glinting ominously in the sunlight. He squared his shoulders and took a stance, channeling every ounce of training and skill he possessed. Chung Myung mirrored his movements, his sword held lazily at his side, exuding an aura of confidence. "Let's see what you've got then." As they both advanced, the crowd held its breath, knowing this would determine the fate of the Southern Edge sect. Jin Jumryong charged forward, launching a series of rapid strikes, each aimed to overwhelm Chung Myung. Clang! Clang! Their swords met with resounding clashes, echoing like thunder. Jin Gumryong fought fiercely, trying to break through Chung Myung's defense. But every attack was met with uncanny precision, the third-class disciple dodging and parrying as if he could predict every move. "Is that all you've got?" Chung Myung taunted, a smirk dancing on his lips. Fueled by indignation, Jin Gumryong poured more energy into his strikes, attempting to outmaneuver Chung Myung. Sweat dripped from his brow as he pushed himself to his limits. He had to show everyone that he wasn't just another casualty. He was a warrior. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, the gap in skill was undeniable. Chung Myung's movements were fluid, almost dance-like, and every attempt Jin Gumryong made was effortlessly countered. "Get serious!" Jin Gumryong shouted, frustration creeping into his voice. "Fine," Chung Myung replied, his eyes narrowing. "Let's see how you handle this." In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Chung Myung's demeanor changed, and he became a whirlwind of motion. His sword sliced through the air, creating arcs of deadly energy that made Jin Gumryong's heart race. Jin Gumryong barely managed to block the initial strike, but the force behind it knocked him off balance. He stumbled, gasping for breath as he tried to regain his footing. Is this really the best the Southern Edge sect has to offer? Chung Myung's voice dripped with disdain. I expected more from a so-called genius. That hit Jin Gumryong like a slap to the face. His blood boiled over, and he charged again, more ferocious than before. He could not let his sect down. He refused to be just another failure. With a roar, he unleashed a powerful strike, the energy radiating from his blade. But as he swung, Chung Myung sidestepped with uncanny ease, countering with a swift cut that landed a glancing blow on Jin Gumryong's side. "Ah!" he gasped, stumbling back, blood staining his robes. The pain ignited his anger even further. "Now you see," Chung Myung said, his voice low and menacing. "This is what happens when you underestimate your opponent." Jin Gumryong fought to regain his composure, but it was clear that he was losing. The crowd around him grew silent, a heavy gloom settling over the Southern Edge sect's disciples. Would this be yet another loss? "No," he shouted inwardly, summoning every ounce of willpower. "I won't give up." In a final desperate move, he charged again, pouring all his remaining strength into one last attack. "I will not be humiliated." But Chung Myung simply laughed, stepping aside with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. With a swift motion, he disarmed Jin Jumryong, sending the sword flying from his grasp. "Game over," Chung Myung said, his sword poised at Jin Gumryong's throat. As the realization hit, Jin Gumryong felt his knees buckle. Defeated. 9 losses, and now he was the 10th. "Let's see if you can handle this humiliation," Chung Myung mocked, lowering his sword slightly. "Remember this moment well. Jin Gumryong's pride lay shattered on the ground, crushed by the weight of his failure. The laughter and whispers of the spectators felt like daggers, each word slicing deeper into his spirit. Yet, even in defeat, a flicker of resolve ignited within him. This isn't over, he vowed silently. I'll come back stronger. I will reclaim our honor. And as he stood there, facing the bitter reality of his defeat, he knew this was not the end, but merely the beginning of a new path. Chung Myung, he whispered through clenched teeth, you'll remember my name. This I swear. Episode 108, Mount Hua will not disappear. 3? The sound of wind escaped from Hunjong's mouth, but he didn't dare take his eyes off the center for even a second. You could practically hear his heart racing faster than a kid who just downed a dozen energy drinks. Hunjong's gaze shifted from Lee Song-baek to Chung Myung. Another win. After crushing it 9 times, Chung Myung was ready for his final opponent, and boy was the tension thicker than a bad rom-com plot. The elders and disciples gathered around were watching in suffocating silence. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, or maybe just Hunjong's overactive imagination. Doubts about Chung Myung? Doubts about the situation? Those were probably valid concerns, but honestly, who cared? What mattered was that Chung Myung was on the verge of a total domination of the Southern Edge sect. Has this ever happened in the history of Mount Hua? Mount Hua and the Southern Edge sect have always been like that awkward couple who just can't get along at family gatherings. Sure, Mount Hua usually had the upper hand, but recent generations were like a plot twist that left everyone scratching their heads. Yet, as far as Hyun-jong knew, there had never been a moment in Mount Hua's history where they'd kicked the Southern Edge sect's butt so thoroughly. Sure, there were tales about the Southern Edge sect staying locked indoors during the Plum Blossom Sword Saints' heyday, but those were just tall tales. This was the real deal. In Mount Hua's darkest hour, an unprecedented spectacle was unfolding before their eyes. It was like witnessing a miracle or a really good plot twist in a telenovela. Hyun-jong looked at Chung Myung, who was staring down the other sect with the confidence of a cat that just knocked over a vase and was pretending it wasn't him. Hyun-jong was more impressed by that dignified attitude than by the victories he had racked up. Just when was it? When was the last time a member of Mount Hua could stand proudly against the Southern Edge sect without feeling like they were about to get smacked down? Oh, my ancestors. Hyun-jong felt the tears welling up. As Mount Hua's sect leader, he knew he had to keep it together and not lose his cool. However, the passion bubbling up inside him was overwhelming, like a teenager getting their first crush. Sect leader, don't say anything. Hyun-jong shook his head at Hyun-sang's call. For now, let's just sit back and see what else he can do. Everyone held their breath, hanging on to Chung Myung's every move like it was the finale of a reality show. Maybe today, a glimmer of hope, brighter than a neon sign in Vegas, emerged in Hunjong's eyes. Maybe the fate of Mount Hua will finally change. Strange, the gazes that pierced him, the feeling of his toes touching the floor, the wooden sword in his hand. Everything felt different from usual. Jin Gemryong stepped onto the stage, feeling the kind of pressure he wasn't used to, like showing up to a party in the same outfit as the host. Strange. Jin Gemryong felt it. This wasn't the kind of gaze that usually fell upon him. Normally, people looked at him like he was the next big thing. Today, it was a mix of anxiety and concern that was new, like a surprise plot twist. Why? Why are they looking at me like that? Jin Jumryong raised his head and saw Chung Myung staring back at him, looking like a kid who just won a pie-eating contest. Right, because of him. It was incomprehensible, but something was boiling inside him like a pot of overcooked noodles. Jin Jumryong worked his whole life to get to this moment. He put in the effort, chased recognition, and lived up to the lofty expectations of his peers. Naturally, praise started rolling in. He was basically the golden child destined to become the sect leader of the Southern Edge sect. But in less than an hour, it all morphed into concern and worry. Am I that unreliable? To the extent that they thought he couldn't handle a single kid from a fallen sect? A wave of cold and heavy anger washed over Jin Gumryong. He locked eyes with Chung Myung, ready to throw down. I didn't like him from the start. That smug face, the pretentious vibe, and those piercing eyes. Above all, Jin Gum-ryong loathed how Chung Myung carried himself like he was looking down on the Southern Edge sect, like a cat watching a mouse scurry by. Jin Gum-ryong took a deep breath, trying to keep it together. Should I give you a compliment? I don't need that. Chung Myung shrugged, playing it cool. It's not like I did anything groundbreaking. Jin Gum-ryong shot him a cold glare. You dare ignore the Southern Edge sect? Ignore? Chung Myung chuckled, looking at him like he was a puppy trying to act tough. It isn't about ignoring you. There's no reason to be proud of picking on the weak. Annoying. Every single word was like a mosquito buzzing in his ear. You? Jin Gum-ryong hesitated, then sighed and shook his head in defeat. No, you don't need to be humble. Your skills speak for themselves. Any humility from you will just tick me off. I admit it. Your strength gives you the right to be arrogant. Defeating 9 of us is no small feat. You'll be recognized as a once-in-a-lifetime genius. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. Shh! Jin Gum-ryong drew his wooden sword and pointed it at Chung Myung, channeling all the drama of a reality show confrontation. Do you know what your misfortune is? Well, you were born at the same time as me. Chung Myung smirked, his eyes glinting like a villain in a superhero movie. That misfortune means you'll always be stuck chasing my shadow for the rest of your life. Chung Myung grinned widely, like he just heard the world's funniest joke. It's good to be so confident. I'm not finished yet. Jin Gum-ryong's voice turned cold as ice. If you hadn't chosen Mount Hua, you might have overcome your misfortune. If you had picked the Southern Edge sect instead of Mount Hua, maybe you would have had a shot at surpassing me. Really? You think so? I do. Jin Gum-ryong cleared his throat, trying to sound all-important. Mount Hua is still tied down by the past. Its disciples are flailing around trying to recover their lost martial arts and restore their former glory. But not the Southern Edge sect. We've moved on, reinventing ourselves without clinging to ancient history, achieving a brighter future. Jin Gum-ryong declared that with the flair of a movie trailer voiceover. That's why Mount Hua will never catch up to the Southern Edge sect. Kua, Chung Myung exclaimed, almost ready to stand up and give a standing ovation. He wanted to clap, but instead he envisioned slapping his sahyungs on the back of their heads. Look at them and learn something, you bastards! Chung Myung might have even shouted that internally. Unfortunately, the bright future Jin Gum-ryong talked about was all built on stealing Mount Hua's martial arts like a kid shoplifting candy. What should I do? To bring the truth to light, 2 things were needed: acknowledging the truth and having the power to back it up. When the Southern Edge sect started practicing the martial arts they swiped from Mount Hua, Chung Myung was so furious he thought he might explode. But does anger change anything? Realistically, there was no way Mount Hua could punish the Southern Edge sect without it turning into a full-blown drama series. If the issue blew up, the only sound would be the Southern Edge sect's cries of innocence, claiming they were the victims. Mount Hua could display the real technique, but the Southern Edge sect would insist they were the original creators. The weak Mount Hua had no choice but to suffer like a sitcom character stuck in a bad plotline. Why? They simply didn't have enough power. Martial arts are sensitive territory. Those who leak their sect's techniques are as good as dead, and those who steal them better be ready for a fight. But Mount Hua couldn't touch the Southern Edge sect. The moment they raised the issue, the Southern Edge sect would declare war, and nobody would step in to help. So, Chung Myung stayed patient. Until now. He suppressed his boiling anger and restrained himself from storming into the Southern Edge sect like an avenging angel. For this moment alone, a gruesome smile spread across his face. The future of the Southern Edge sect? That's a solid thing to say. Chung Myung grinned at Jin Gum-ryong. Right? Chung Myung had been pondering the Southern Edge sect's future quite a bit. What to do with their future? Chung Myung had left a little surprise for the Southern Edge sect, not the perfect gift. Chung Myung raised his sword high, and his eyes sparkled with an intense light. Ready? Let's see if you can keep up with the genius of Mount Hua. The tension thickened in the air as Jin Gum-ryong braced himself, realizing the seriousness of Chung Myung's tone. The crowd held their breath, caught between excitement and apprehension. The Southern Edge sect had witnessed his prowess, but this was different. This was a duel that would define their futures. Chung Myung lunged forward with a sudden burst of speed that was almost blinding. The sound of his wooden sword slicing through the air echoed like a thunderclap, forcing Jin Gumryong to react instinctively. He parried the attack, but the sheer force sent a shockwave through his body. Whoa, nice reflexes. Chung Myung chuckled, his expression a mix of amusement and focus. But let's see if you can handle this. With a swift motion, he spun and delivered a kick aimed straight at Jin Gumryong's midsection. Jin Gumryong barely managed to sidestep, feeling the rush of wind from the blow. That was close, Chung Myung said, grinning widely. But I'm just getting started. The crowd was a mixture of gasps and murmurs. Every exchange between the two was electrifying, with Chung Myung's playful taunts adding an extra layer of intensity. Jin Gumryong, now visibly agitated, started to sweat. You're just a clown. What do you think you're doing? Clown? Chung Myung raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. I'm an artist of martial arts, and I'm about to paint a masterpiece right on your face. And with that, he launched into a flurry of strikes, each one faster and more unpredictable than the last. Jin Gumryong struggled to keep pace, his mind racing. Damn it, he muttered. He's way too fast. As the battle raged on, Hyun-jong watched with a mix of pride and concern. Is this really our Chung Myung? He thought, unable to tear his gaze away. Who would have thought he could make the Southern Edge sect look so, well, pathetic? Don't blink, one disciple shouted, eyes wide with excitement. You might miss the moment Mount Hua shines. Back on the stage, Chung Myung could feel the pressure mounting. Jin Gumryong was starting to adapt, dodging and blocking with increasing skill. Not bad, but still not enough, Chung Myung said, his voice teasing. Have you ever considered a career change? Maybe something less martial? Shut up, Jin Gumryong barked, visibly frustrated. I'll show you. With renewed determination, he gathered his energy and launched a powerful attack, aiming for a decisive blow. Chung Myung smirked, anticipating the move. Predictable, he called out, sidestepping effortlessly. You've got to try harder than that. But Jin Gumryong wasn't done. He quickly spun, following up with a sweeping kick that sent dust flying. Chung Myung barely avoided it, but just barely. Nice try. Maybe next time, aim for the head instead. Chung Myung laughed, his spirit unbroken. In that moment, Jin Gumryong felt the tide turn. The onlookers were watching, their eyes filled with disbelief. This wasn't just a duel anymore. It was a spectacle. You think this is funny? Jin Gumryong shouted, forcing himself to stay calm despite the rising anger. You'll regret underestimating me. Regret? I'm just getting started, Chung Myung declared, shifting into a combat stance that radiated confidence. Prepare yourself. As they clashed once again, the sounds of wood against wood rang out like a symphony of combat, each strike echoing through the audience. Is he really serious? One elder whispered to another, his eyes wide with disbelief. He's treating this like a game. He might just win, and we'll be left picking up the pieces, the other replied, concern creeping into his tone. But the fight was far from over. Each moment brought new surprises as Chung Myung seemed to dance around Jin Gumryong, his agility and speed unmatched. With each swing, he was not just fighting. He was showing them what true martial spirit looked like. Finally, with a sudden burst of inspiration, Chung Myung leaped into the air, executing a series of flips that left the crowd gasping. He landed gracefully, sword pointing directly at Jin Gumryong. Ready for the finale? Chung Myung shouted, eyes glinting mischievously. And in that instant, he charged forward, channeling all his energy into one final decisive attack. Let's end this with a bang. The clash reverberated through the arena as the two swords met, a burst of energy exploding outward, sending everyone stumbling back. Dust and debris filled the air, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. As the dust settled, everyone held their breath, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Chung Myung stood tall, his wooden sword slightly trembling but intact, while Jin Gumryong knelt on one knee, panting heavily, the realization of defeat dawning upon him. Looks like the Southern Edge sect needs to rethink its future, Chung Myung exclaimed, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. The crowd erupted into cheers, a wave of jubilation sweeping through Mount Hua's disciples. They had witnessed something remarkable, something that would be talked about for generations. Hyun-jong's heart swelled with pride. Mount Hua had not just survived, it had thrived. Long live Mount Hua, someone shouted, and the chant echoed through the valley. Chung Myung turned, raising his sword in victory. Let's make Mount Hua great again, he declared, earning both laughter and applause. As Jin Gumryong accepted his defeat, he looked up at Chung Myung with a mix of respect and resentment. You won this time, but don't think this is over. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Chung Myung replied with a wink. But next time, bring your A game. The tension faded, replaced by the sense of camaraderie and hope that only victory could bring. For Mount Hua, a new dawn had begun. Episode 109, Mount Hua Will Not Disappear 4. Elder, will Sahyung win? Seeing the elder tightly biting his lips, the disciple asked cautiously. Samasung parted his lips to answer as a stream of blood trickled down his chin. Will he win? It was an absurd question. He has to win, no matter what. If that monster's wings aren't broken today, then he would continue to soar further into the sky. Once that monster ascends, no one will ever be able to catch up. From that moment on, that monster would become a dragon. This might be the last chance. It might be the worst-case scenario, but Samaseng hadn't given up hope. It'll be possible for Jin Gumryong. Although he was also a second-class disciple, Samasung had faith in him. Jin Gumryong's abilities stood far above the others. Although Samasung had spoken harshly to him, he firmly believed that Jin Gumryong could stand among the best in the world with enough luck. In other words, if Jin Gumryong cannot defeat that child, then no one in this world within that age range will be able to stop Chung Myung. In other words, if Chung Myung defeats Jin Gumryong today, then Chung Myung will naturally take his place as the strongest in his generation. That outcome was unacceptable. We should have stopped him sooner. Even if they had been criticized, Mount Hua should have been exterminated before it came to this. This was the result of them not destroying Mount Hua properly. Damn those Mount Hua bastards! Samasung glared at them. He could not allow history to remember this day as the Southern Edge sect's disgrace. Never. At that moment, Jin Gumryong's sword began to bloom like a fantasy. Samasung clenched his fists as he watched the 12-movement snowflower sword technique unfold perfectly. This sword will take your breath away. Chung Myung looked at the sword. Similar. The movement was copied really well. The splendor, the beauty of a single flower, as if it was alive and breathing, and a keen, fatal blow hidden behind the beauty. Truly, the 24-movement plum blossom sword technique. It is different from what Lee Song-baek performed. If Lee Song-baek's sword was merely an imitation of Mount Hua's technique, then Jin Gumryong's sword had an elegance that even Chung Myung might admire. Anyone bearing witness to such a fantastic sword would end up praising it. But the person in front of Jin Gumryong was Chung Myung, and he avoided the sword. Swish! Jin Gumryong's sword cut the hem of Chung Myung's robe. Swish! The tip of his hair was also cut. Swish! Soon, it brushed past Chung Myung's cheek. A red line appeared, and a drop of blood trickled down. Chung Myung easily stepped back and raised a finger to wipe away the flowing blood before licking his finger. Bittersweet. You won't be able to defeat me by running away like that. Hearing Jin Gumryong's provocation, Chung Myung simply looked back at him in silence. Jin Gumryong's eyes revealed a sense of peace, and he appeared relaxed. Once upon a time, Mount Hua made a name for itself with a sword resembling a flower, right? But that's a story of the past. Now even those legends will be buried beneath the Southern Edge sect's new sword. The world will remember the tales of my sect and forget the sword of Mount Hua. Chung Myung quietly listened without responding. The ancestors of my sect created this technique to show the world that the Southern Edge sect's swordsmanship will always be superior to Mount Hua's. I honestly believe that it was a meaningless act. What's the point in proving our superiority over a dying sect? However, Jin Gumryong spoke in a cold voice. There is meaning in this sword technique being the one that severs the last breath from Mount Hua. Come, I will end this dying legacy. Arrogant words, but it was a poignant talk. However, Chung Myung's reaction to this was different from what Jin Gumryong expected. Pfft. Chung Myung covered his mouth and then began to lose himself in laughter. What are you doing? Chung Myung, who struggled to hold back his laughter, shook his hand with his head down. No, I am trying, but I just can't hold it back anymore. Chung Myung smiled, revealed his teeth, and raised his sword at Jin Gum Ryong. I enjoyed the show. That act, well, it is more like a clown. Clown? Right. I enjoyed that clumsy impersonation. Even I can do it if it's only at that level. Jin Gum Ryong's face was distorted. He gnashed his teeth, and his forehead crumpled. How dare you compare my sword to a mimicry? Ah, don't get me wrong. It isn't like I am looking down on you. Rather, it's the sword technique, or perhaps it's the Southern Edge sect who invented the technique that I'm looking down on? Jin Gumryong glared at Chung Myung. Yet Chung Myung didn't back down. You don't need to glare at me like that. I am going to give you a gift. I'll fill the void in that sword technique. It would be better for you to think about how you can escape with your body intact. I don't think that's something that a person who could barely touch their opponent should say. Jin Gumryong flinched. The 12-movement snowflower sword technique. The opponent shouldn't be able to distinguish between genuine strikes and illusory falsehoods. So, wouldn't it be impossible for Chung Myung to avoid it? Jin Gumryong's knuckles turned white as he clenched his sword. Chung Myung wouldn't be able to survive once this technique was displayed, and Mount Hua wouldn't dare to ask Jin Gumryong to pay for his actions either. If they pressed charges, they would have to deal with the entire Southern Edge sect. In the end, the strong dominate the weak. The weak may complain about injustice, but they can never punish the strong. An absolute law that can never be changed. You, however, Chung Myung brutally interrupted Jin Gumryong. I will ask you one thing. It was an unfamiliar tone. Just what is that sword? What do you mean? No, don't bother. That's enough. Chung Myung shook his head. It meant that he meant nothing. Chung Myung suppressed his true intention and spoke with a smirk in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. That's a pretty good imitation, but it won't be enough. Mount Hua's sword is faster, sharper, and more dazzling. Everyone certainly heard that declaration. With this, the Southern Edge sect would be unable to escape from the curse. Even now, you've got a big mouth. If you find a way to kill my mouth, let me know. Anyway, you're the one that's been doing all the talking for a while. You. Jin Jumryong moved his sword, deciding not to exchange words anymore. He was going to fight it out and not talk. One win. Just one win. His sword was splendid and swiftly traversed through the air. The chi emanating from the sword began to form vivid flower patterns. One win, and another win in a different aspect. Soon, the flowers created by Jin Jumryong began to cover the area. As beautiful as can be, yet equally as dangerous. You will die by this sword. 12-movement snowflower sword technique. Jin Jumryong displayed the perfect version of this technique, the snowflower full heaven. The flower that dyed the world in white began to wrap around Chung Myung as if wanting to tear his body to shreds. Chung Myung! Screams erupted from all around. The disciples of Mount Hua, who were silently watching as if possessed, jumped up from their seats at once. They knew how dangerous that sword could be. They didn't have to be there to know. Just looking at it from afar was enough to make goosebumps rise and their hearts skip a beat. Chung Myung, whose strength always instilled confidence and faith in them, suddenly seemed to have fallen into a dangerous situation where his survival was uncertain. Yoonjong clasped his hands in front of his chest without realizing it. Heavenly God! Jin Gumryong's sword was so fierce that they worried for the safety of the monster-like Chung Myung. It seemed like no one could survive in. Chung Myung's single plum blossom had transformed the battlefield into a mesmerizing spectacle. The vibrant red petals danced in the air like tiny fireworks, each one telling a story of resilience, strength, and the unwavering spirit of Mount Hua. As the blossoms fell, they seemed to absorb the very essence of the air, exuding a fragrance so potent that it wrapped around the hearts of all who witnessed it. In that moment, doubts faded away. The Southern Edge sect's blade that had once seemed unstoppable now appeared mere folly against the beauty of Chung Myung's technique. Jin Gumryong, caught in the whirlwind of red blossoms, felt an unsettling chill run down his spine. His flawless 12-movement snowflower sword technique, which had been blooming with confidence, suddenly felt like a mere imitation. The elegant patterns of his flowers lost their luster under the glorious display of Mount Hua's spirit. What is this? Jin Jumryong stammered, his eyes wide as he stared at the red blossoms swirling around him. The fierce energy he had channeled began to waver, and with it his resolve crumbled. Chungmyung, with a calm demeanor, stepped forward, his sword poised and ready. "This is the true essence of swordsmanship," he declared, his voice steady and powerful. "It's not about mimicking techniques or proving superiority. It's about the soul behind the blade." With a swift motion, he cut through the air, sending the red plum blossoms cascading toward Jin Gemryong. Each petal shimmered like a shard of light, striking with an intensity that reverberated through the battlefield. The disciples of Mount Hua gasped as the storm of blossoms swirled toward their adversary. They could feel the weight of the moment pressing upon them. Their hopes, their dreams, and the legacy of Mount Hua rested on this clash. "Stop!" "No!" Jin Gumryong yelled, swinging his sword in desperation. But it was too late. The blossoms converged on him, overwhelming his defenses and engulfing him in a fiery red. In an instant, the battlefield fell silent. The vivid colors began to fade, leaving behind a haunting beauty, a single plum blossom, still vibrant against the white snow. It was as if time itself had stopped to acknowledge the significance of this moment. Chungmyung stood tall amidst the remnants of the battle, the remnants of his technique swirling around him. The disciples of Mount Hua felt their spirits lift, a warmth flooding their hearts as they realized that this was their moment of victory. "Mount Hua will not disappear," Chungmyung proclaimed, his voice echoing in the stillness. "We are not just a name. We are a legacy that will bloom through the ages." Jin Gyumryong, now defeated and humbled, stared at Chungmyung with disbelief. The realization hit him. He had underestimated the true spirit of Mount Hua, the indomitable will that breathed life into every technique, every strike. "Today, you have shown me the strength of your sword," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "But I will not be forgotten. The Southern Edge sect will rise again." Chungmyung, still holding his sword high, offered a knowing smile. "Rise or fall, it matters not. The essence of swordsmanship transcends mere power. It is about the heart of the wielder. Remember this day, for it marks not just a battle, but a lesson for us all." As Jin Gomryong bowed his head, defeated yet enlightened, the disciples of Mount Hua erupted into cheers. The sound echoed through the mountains, a testament to their resilience and the legacy they would carry forward. With newfound hope, they gathered around Chungmyung, their spirits united as they looked toward the future. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, fortified by the beauty of their tradition and the strength of their bonds. And in that moment, the winds of change blew through Mount Hua, carrying the scent of plum blossoms, a promise that they would endure, thrive, and forever bloom against all odds. Here's the episode with some added humor and adult slang, while keeping the original content intact. Episode 110, Mount Hua Will Not Disappear 5. This! Jin Gumryong saw the tinge of red blooming within the white world he'd created. A feeble light, like a drop of blood that fell on a pure white snowfield. It was nothing more than a tiny dot that seemed fragile, yet radiantly shone red. The red dot soon vividly took on the form of a plum blossom. One blossom, then another. In an instant, plum blossoms began to blend into Jin Gumryong's technique and burned it away. Just as snow melts in the blazing spring sun, the remnants of Jin Gumryong's technique melted away wherever the red plum blossoms bloomed. Plum blossoms? It was said that Mount Hua could no longer make plum blossoms bloom. That was why everyone assumed that Mount Hua would be unable to revive again. The plum blossom is the symbol of Mount Hua, no matter what anyone says. If Mount Hua cannot make the plum blossoms bloom, they could never recapture their former glory. But at this moment, the plum blossoms that had vanished from Mount Hua's history had begun to bloom again, even more vividly and colorfully than your Aunt Judy at a wine tasting. "Ache!" Jin Jemryong couldn't believe it. He didn't doubt that Chungmyung's sword could give rise to the plum blossoms. That wasn't what Jin Jemryong failed to understand. He couldn't believe that the snowflowers he desperately bloomed were melting into Mount Hua's plum blossoms. Why? The 12-movement snowflower sword technique. This technique contained the last 100 years of the Southern Edge sect's efforts. Wasn't this sword art supposed to culminate the essence of all Southern Edge's techniques and show their dedication to development? Even if the legendary Plum Blossom sword was reproduced, the sword of the Southern Edge sect must be more advanced. It was impossible that their technique would lose to a relic of the older generations. But why is this happening? Melting away, tearing it apart. The moment the pure white flowers Jin Gum created touched Chung Myung's red plum blossoms, they collapsed as if they had never existed at all. Why? Jin Ryong's eyes began to tremble. He couldn't display a sword any more perfect than this. It was a sword that unfolded perfectly, to the point that perfection itself seemed inadequate to describe it. So, why couldn't that shabby plum blossom be defeated? Crushed. 12-movement snowflower sword. It was broken. The sword of the Southern Edge sect. Collapsing. Their pride. Everything Jin Ryong had built up till now was scattered by the red plum blossoms. Why? Jin Ryong screamed. Chung Myung swung his sword with a half-hearted look in his eyes, like someone who just woke up from a nap and realized they forgot their coffee. A stream of red plum blossoms trailed from the tip of his sword. The flowers following Jin Ryong's sword collapsed without any effort. A shell. Just a shell. No, an imitation of a shell. Everyone misunderstands Mount Hua's sword. Even the disciples of Mount Hua misunderstand it. The plum blossom sword technique, no, the sword of Mount Hua, is a sword that faithfully reproduces the color and beauty of the plum blossoms. People misunderstand and assume that Mount Hua's sword is judged by how beautiful and sophisticated the plum blossoms are. But is that all? Mount Hua is a Taoist sect. All of Mount Hua's sword techniques walk the path of Tao. The Wudang sect considered Taiji as their source. The Diankang sect considered the sun as their source. The Kongtong sect considers the 5 elements as their source. Every Taoist sect in the world resembles a form of nature, and their ultimate goal is to realize the Tao in their body. But Mount Hua is different. Mount Hua only pursues plum blossoms with their sword. When the sword of the Wudang sect reaches its peak, they feel like they have attained their source. Qin Cheng's sword becomes a blazing sun. The Kongtong sect harnesses the power of the 5 elements in their sword. However, Mount Hua has plum blossoms and plum blossoms alone. This made Mount Hua different from others. It is a sect that feverishly pursues glorious and beautiful techniques. But was that all? Did Mount Hua's sword only pursue the image of the plum blossom? Of course not. Everyone misunderstood. Chung Myung finally understood. After swinging the sword again and again, making plum blossoms bloom and spending his entire life with Mount Hua's sword, he managed to climb to a height that no one else had ever reached. What Mount Hua strove to reproduce wasn't the plum blossom. Mount Hua didn't imitate the plum blossom. Mount Hua's sword makes plum blossoms bloom. It isn't the plum blossom. It was the blooming. Blooming. The conception of life. The fruit of patience finally blooms after persevering through a long winter. Since the plum blossoms are in full bloom on Mount Hua, they were chosen to represent the ability. But their sword can give birth to new life. So what does it matter which flower they choose to produce? The essence of Mount Hua's sword is blooming. Those who become blinded by the splendor of the plum blossoms and sharpen their swords in pursuit of that image will never reach the sect's true essence. If one can understand that Mount Hua wasn't pursuing the plum blossoms, but blooming, right? Once they reached the level of Chung Myung, there was no need to distinguish between techniques. Even if it was a flower that wasn't the plum blossom. Even if it wasn't the 24-movement plum blossom sword technique. Whether it was the 12-movement snowflower sword or the falling flower sword, they could make the plum blossoms bloom. That was the true meaning of Mount Hua's sword. Those who live under the name of Mount Hua need to bear this in their hearts. Those that fail to understand this and simply pursue the dazzling sword they see would lose their light and forever wander, unable to reach the peak. Right? Like Jin Ryong, and just like his ancestors who created that sword technique. Jin Ryong stared, mesmerized by Chung Myung. Look clearly. How your sword collapses. Human memory works mysteriously. The image of the Southern Edge sect's technique being broken by Chung Myung's more splendid and vivid sword in this conference would be engraved into their memories forever. Every time they swing their swords, they will remember this sight. Whenever they train, They will try to imitate what they have seen. In the end, the strength they believed in and depended upon will not help them escape from this curse. Flashier and even more extraordinary. But there is nothing at the end. All that exists for them is emptiness. The more they pursue splendor, the more the Southern Edge sect would lose their sword and fall deeper into the mire. Even if those they trusted betray you, even if they lost the sword techniques that were the center of their sect, even if an enemy pushes into the heart of their sect, Mount Hua will never disappear, as long as the spirit of Mount Hua remains what they seek. Then, just as plum blossoms endure the harsh winter and bloom again, Mount Hua will once again make its name in the world. But what if the Southern Edge sect lost their techniques? What if they lose the spirit they once pursued? What if they were betrayed by their own ideas? Even if they haven't suffered a decline, the sect would soon collapse. Now Chungmyung's sword will serve as poison for these men and become a curse that will bind their futures. Look, clearly, what you tried to steal, what you wanted so much, I will show you. This would become eternal shackles and would serve as Chungmyung's revenge for what the Southern Edge sect did to Mount Hua. Chungmyung's sword gracefully flew across the sky. From the tip of the sword, small plum blossoms bloomed, first one and then another. The plum blossoms constantly bloomed. A flower that radiated life erupted into the world. The martial arts are divided into yin and yang, and Tai Chi is divided into 5 elements. The 5 elements make up the world, and within that world, life is born. After all, the world is an endless cycle of decay and rebirth. In this blooming, there is a path that the ancestors of Mount Hua tried to reach. Mount Hua's disciples entered Chungmyung's sight. Seeing them mesmerized by Mount Hua's sword evoked a strange sense of sorrow within Chungmyung. This is also my atonement, what he should have done but couldn't. So, look at this now. This was what Mount Hua ended up losing. This was where these disciples would need to climb one day. Ah, Hyunjong exclaimed at what he saw. He didn't know why he felt this way. The scene before his eyes had touched his heart. Plum blossoms were fully blooming once again. The plum blossoms that were out of season were suddenly blooming all around the bleak Mount Hua. And in that place, there was a spring that never seemed to come. A spring that never came to Mount Hua, even as the seasons changed. Spring had never come, even when a young boy grew into a healthy young man. When that young man grew into an old man, whose shoulders were crushed, Jin Jumryong's world collapsed around him, swallowed by the overwhelming beauty of the plum blossoms. The petals danced in the air, swirling like the memories of his pride, his arrogance, and the techniques he believed were unmatched. He could feel the weight of his ancestors' expectations pressing down on him, their dreams of glory now overshadowed by the reality before him. This was not just a loss, it was a shattering of everything he thought he knew about power and mastery. Why? He whispered, the question hanging in the air like the delicate petals drifting around him. Why can't I? But the plum blossoms offered no answers, only their radiant presence, taunting him with what he could never achieve. Around him, the world was transforming. The cold, harsh reality he had known for so long was giving way to a vibrant spring he thought he would never see. It was a renewal, a rebirth, and yet he stood paralyzed, trapped in his own despair. Chungmyung's sword continued to swing, each movement a graceful dance, a celebration of life, and a reminder of all that Jin Gumryong had lost. With each swing, more blossoms erupted into existence, filling the air with their fragrance and beauty. Is this what you wanted? Chungmyung's voice cut through the silence, calm and steady, yet laced with an undeniable strength. Did you truly believe that technique alone could define you? Jin Jemryong's gaze faltered, torn between the breathtaking spectacle and the bitter reality of his defeat. The truth was undeniable. He had been so focused on perfection, on crafting the most beautiful technique, that he had forgotten the essence of what it meant to wield a sword. Your blade is not a mere weapon, Chungmyung continued, his voice resonating with the wisdom of experience. It is an extension of your will, your spirit. It is a reflection of the life you cultivate within. And with that, the truth struck Jin Gumryong like a bolt of lightning. His sword was beautiful, yes, but it lacked the heart, the spirit that could breathe life into it. He had chased an ideal, neglecting the very foundation of what made a sword truly powerful. Look around you, Chung Myung urged, his sword sweeping through the air, sending a cascade of blossoms swirling in a breathtaking display. This is the spirit of Mount Hua. This is what we strive for. Not just beauty, but life itself. As the last remnants of his technique crumbled away, Jin Jumrong felt a strange sensation begin to stir within him. It was not anger or bitterness, but a deep-seated recognition of his own limitations. The knowledge that he had been blinded by his pursuit of perfection. The realization was painful, yet liberating. In that moment of clarity, he understood the true meaning of the plum blossoms. They were not merely a symbol of beauty. They represented resilience, rebirth, and the unyielding spirit of Mount Hua. As Chung Myung's sword continued to bloom, Jin Jumryong felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Perhaps this was not the end, but a new beginning. Mount Hua will endure, he whispered, a newfound determination rising within him. As long as there are those who believe in the spirit of the plum blossoms, we will rise again. With that thought anchoring him, Jin Gimryong found himself standing taller, the weight of his despair lifting. He may have lost this battle, but he was ready to embrace the lessons learned from it. The plum blossoms danced around him, a vivid reminder that even in defeat, there was beauty to be found. And as he looked toward Chung Myung, he knew that this was not just a rivalry, but a journey toward understanding what it truly meant to wield the sword of Mount Hua. Let's begin anew, Jin Jumryong said, his voice firm as he faced the blooming sea of red petals. I will not be defined by this defeat. Chung Myung nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips as he extended his sword, inviting Jin Jumryong to join him in this new chapter. Together, they would carry the legacy of Mount Hua forward, transcending the confines of their past and embracing the promise of the future.